Chapter 472. Seeing that Sasuke was obviously exhausted, Red Lotus and Yugo hurriedly wanted to run to Sasuke's side to support him. But Sasuke stopped his teammates' actions with a look. After all, it was still impossible to judge whether the enemy really lost his ability to move. So everything must be done with the mission. Red Lotus and Yugo naturally had a tacit understanding with Sasuke. They knew that Sasuke didn't want to be supported, so they had to slowly advance in the direction of Killer Bee with Suigetsu in a triangular state. All three of them maintained a vigilant state. After all, column force was different from ordinary ninja. After such an attack, ordinary ninja must have lost the ability to resist, but column force had resistance and recovery ability far beyond ordinary people. Now is not the time to take it lightly. Slowly approaching the position where Killer Bee was standing, Suigetsu, Yugo, and Red Lotus movements also became slower and slower. Without Sasuke's support, Killer Bee could only rely on the three of them if he still had the power to resist. In such a case, no matter how cautious they were, it was not too much. They exchanged glances with each other, and the three of them were finally less than half a meter away from Killer Bee's direction. Killer Bee's current state looked extremely miserable. There were many traces of being burned by lightning on his dark skin. Because of the bijou transformation, Killer Bee's skin also showed an extremely strange dark red color. Water release water iron cannon, second ding. Suigetsu pinched his hand into a gun shape, and a small group of water iron cannon was condensing on his two index fingers. Feeling that the water pressure had reached a certain limit, Suigetsu controlled the small water iron cannon at his fingertips to shoot at Killer Bee's body. Just after the water iron cannon at his fingertips was shot out, two more water iron cannon condensed between Suigetsu's fingers. Almost continuously, Shueiwa had already shot out 6 water iron cannons. 2 hit Killer Bee's shoulder, 2 hit Killer Bee's crotch, and 2 hit Killer Bee's knee. The water iron cannon became extremely penetrating due to Suigetsu's accumulation, and it almost instantly penetrated Killer Bee's body on the ground. Looking at his two teammates, Water Moon nodded, indicating that his teammate Killer Bee has lost the ability to resist. So Red Lotus's hand began to form hand seals, and a half-sealing technique and half-ninjutsu was quickly completed. In order to increase the power and hardness of the ninjutsu she cast, Kuroto used almost 3 times the amount of chakra she would normally use to cast such ninjutsu. Crystal Escape Red Fruit Change. It was originally a ninjutsu used for self-defense, but under the deliberate control of Red Lotus, it became a ninjutsu with internal defense far stronger than external defense. Killer Bee's body was firmly sealed in the pink crystal. Yugo took out a sealing scroll that he had prepared beforehand. Killer Bee's body, which had become even larger after being wrapped in the red fruit, was sealed within the scroll. After finishing all the operations, Red Lotus, Yugo, and Suigetsu finally came to Sasuke, who was almost sitting on the ground. Although they didn't say anything, the concern in their eyes was so obvious. Mission completed. It's time for us to go back. Using the long sword in his hand as a support point, Sasuke stood up with a little difficulty. Looking at the scroll in Yugo's hand, Sasuke nodded and issued his order. Turning around, Sasuke was just about to leave, but Suigetsu stopped in front of Sasuke, looking like he had something to say but didn't know how to say it. For his teammates, Sasuke has already regarded them as people he needs to cherish, so when he saw Suigetsu's hesitant look, Sasuke was not unhappy, but he said to Suigetsu with a little doubt, "What are you talking about?" "What's wrong, Suigetsu? Do you have something to say?" Hearing Sasuke's question, Suigetsu could only take a deep breath, as if to stabilize his emotions, and said to Sasuke, "Is what we are doing right now really right?" Very unusually, Suigetsu didn't show his usual rascal look this time, but looked at Sasuke with some seriousness. Obviously, this question has been in Suigetsu's heart for a long time. Before meeting with Hoodlum, Sasuke said to his 3 teammates that joining Akatsuki this time was actually to explore Akatsuki's intelligence as much as possible, and then find a way to destroy Akatsuki's plan. Originally, they thought that although they seemed to be dealing with Hachibi column force this time, as long as they didn't put in any effort, it would be better to make the appearance of defeat more realistic. On the one hand, this can save their own lives, and on the other hand, it can also be regarded as an indirect hindrance to Akatsuki's plan. But in the heat of the battle, Sasuke directly used his strongest ninjutsu. In this case, Red Lotus, Yugo, and Suigetsu couldn't go easy on them. After a battle, they actually caught Hachibi column force. Although they don't know how many bijou has been collected by Akatsuki, now that they have set their sights on the powerful Hachibi, doesn't it prove that Akatsuki has actually collected a lot of bijou? Their current behavior doesn't seem to be hindering Akatsuki's plan at all. Instead, it feels like they are helping the evildoers. Hearing Suigetsu's words, Sasuke naturally couldn't pretend that he didn't hear it. So after clearing his throat a little and adjusting his thoughts, Sasuke asked Suigetsu, "What do you think?" "Suigetsu, let's not talk about whether what we are doing now is helping the evildoers. I want to ask you a question first. What kind of people do you think Akatsuki's people are?" Although Suigetsu had some doubts, since it was a question asked by Sasuke, Suigetsu naturally couldn't ignore it directly. So Suigetsu could only search for all the information he knew about Akatsuki, carefully thinking about Sasuke's question, and then said to Sasuke, "They are a group of lunatics with powerful strength and paranoid thinking." Trying hard to compare the information he knew with the vocabulary in his mind, Suigetsu found that it seems that only lunatics are suitable for Akatsuki's members. Isn't it a group of lunatics who attempt to subvert the ninja world and make the ninja world break out the largest battle? Indeed, they are a group of lunatics. Hearing Suigetsu's words, Sasuke slowly nodded, but then turned to Suigetsu and said, "But they are not only a group of lunatics, such a group of lunatics is not only powerful, but also ruthless. So they also have intelligence beyond ordinary people. If we don't work hard, if we perfunctorily perform the task they give us, do you think they won't find out with their intelligence? These people's goal is the 9-tailed beasts. Even if we really help them collect the 8-tailed beasts, so what? As long as the last-tailed beast is missing, their plan will not be successful. And 9 tails, I believe they will have no way to get it." For some reason, when talking about 9 tails, Sasuke's eyes suddenly flashed with a ray of confidence. Sasuke believes in Woodleaf, believes in Nangongja, and believes in the blonde boy who has the most dazzling smile since childhood. Chapter 473. Ah! What the hell is this? Jiraiya looked at the 3-centimeter thick stack of documents in his hand. The veins on his face were bulging. It looked like he wanted to tear the documents in his hand into pieces. However, Jiraiya didn't dare to tear this document to shreds as he thought, because this document involved many conflicts between clans in Konoha, big and small. These things need to be coordinated by Hokage. Now that Watergate is practicing Sage Mode in Mount Myaboku, and the qualifications of the Shadow Clone Jutsu and Narashikaku are not enough to convince these conservative clans. This kind of thing can only fall on Jiraiya and Tsunade. Such a thing involving all kinds of interests is like a mess in front of Jiraiya, and his wife Tsunade is dealing with another thing with Shizune, so when Jiraiya just got the document, he didn't ask Tsunade to help him look at it. Finally, he couldn't hold back the anxiety in his heart and shouted at the ceiling. Shizune raised her head and looked at Jiraiya, who was roaring towards the sky. She took out a small notebook from her arms and gently drew an ink mark on it. Looking at the small notebook in Shizune's hand, it's not difficult to see that there are several pages of densely drawn letters on it. Obviously, as long as Jiraiya has such an uncontrollable emotion, it will be recorded by Shizune. Maybe this is something Shizune does to comfort him when he's bored. Hearing Jiraiya's wail, Tsunade can only put down the document in her hand and slowly walked to Jiraiya's side. She skillfully took the document in Jiraiya's hand, used a pen in her hand to slightly organize the information inside from time to time, and then returned the document in her hand to Jiraiya. Tsunade has watched her 2 grandfathers deal with public affairs since she was a child, and when she grew up, she would occasionally help her teacher, 3 generations Hokage, deal with some less important public affairs. Tsunade was actually very clear about the process. Although dealing with the affairs of Woodleaf Village like this was a little more difficult for Tsunade, it was still within her ability. I really admire Watergate. He can deal with such bullshit things one by one patiently. Shaking the document in his hand, Jiraiya said to Tsunade with a little admiration. After hearing Jiraiya's sigh, Tsunade also nodded. Indeed, being the Hokage is not only an honor, but also an important duty. Woodleaf Village needs the Hokage's help to solve all the big and small matters, so in fact, after becoming the Hokage, it is no different from contributing everything to the Woodleaf Village. If you don't really sit in the position of Hokage, you can't understand how heavy the responsibility of such a title is. Speaking of this, Tsunade couldn't help but think of her grandfather who died young, her second grandfather who died in the war, and her teacher. These people are worthy of the respect of every Woodleaf ninja and civilians. In order to maintain the current stability of Woodleaf, there are countless people, whether in the light or in the dark, sacrificing their blood and their lives. Just as Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Shizune sighed together about the duties and obligations of Hokage, a figure quietly appeared in the sky of Woodleaf. Wearing the uniform of the Akatsuki with a black background and red clouds, Pain, with orange hair, was overlooking the panoramic view of Woodleaf like a god at the moment. With Rinnegan, Pain's vision was naturally very strong. Although he was high in the sky, the scene inside Woodleaf could still be seen very clearly. The pedestrians and ninjas coming and going in the streets of Woodleaf naturally had no way to find a powerful ninja with sage eyes suddenly appeared above their heads. They were still busy with their own things. But these people all had something in common. Their faces were filled with happy smiles. They were happy that they lived in Woodleaf, and they were happy that they could fight for their dreams. Woodleaf. Pain looked at Woodleaf. Although his eyes were cold, there was a hint of hope and envy. In the war-filled ninja world, only Woodleaf can maintain such peace and calmness. Such a life is worthy of envy, but the people who have such a life also have to bear the same sin. It is a sin to enjoy such a life alone. I, Pain, as a god walking in the world, judge you guilty. Pain slowly opened his hands, and chakra continued to condense in Pain's hands. A little black halo slowly formed in Pain's palms. If Jiraiya was here, he would definitely find that Pain was using his unique ability called Shinra Tensei at this moment. But at this moment, the chakra condensed in Pain's body was far more powerful than the Shinra Tensei that Jiraiya had experienced before. Now, the large number of chakra condensed in Pain's hands has proved that this Shinra Tensei will have far more power than before. Konoha has a defensive enchantment around it. As a village's guard enchantment, Konoha's enchantment naturally has various functions, and the detection of chakra is naturally one of the functions that can't be ignored. When Pain was suspended in the sky, because the amount of chakra used was very small, it was difficult to detect. But when Pain began to gather power for his Shinra Tensei, Woodleaf's barrier squad immediately discovered the abnormality in the sky above the Woodleaf. According to the barrier squad's rules, such a powerful source of chakra suddenly appeared near the Woodleaf must be directly transmitted to the Hokage's office unconditionally. So when Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Shizune had been dealing with official business, an umbu directly under Watergate appeared directly in the Hokage's office. Reporting to several lords, a huge energy source appeared above the Woodleaf. The barrier squad requests to immediately send Summon Beast and Ninja to investigate. Hearing the words of the umbu, Jiraiya also immediately focused on detecting the huge energy source in the mouth of the umbu. The familiar aura of chakra directly made Jiraiya fall into a sluggish state, and Jiraiya could only murmur, "He is here." Chapter 474. This familiar chakra was so familiar to Jiraiya. This chakra belonged to his disciple, son of war Uzumaki Nagato, or Pain Rikudo. The moment he felt this chakra, Jiraiya's face was gloomy. Jiraiya, who had always been very frivolous, suddenly showed such a serious look. Whether it was Tsunade or Shizun, they couldn't help but be serious. Being able to make Jiraiya so serious, didn't it prove that the person who was detected was a very bad guy? Jiraiya. Who is he? Tsunade walked to Jiraiya's side and put her hand on Jiraiya's shoulder. She seemed to want Jiraiya to explain a little for her. But Jiraiya knew that now was not the time to explain to his wife one by one. He just took a step forward and stood in front of the Umbu who delivered the information for him. Umbu of Hokage, listen to my order. Jiraiya suddenly ordered the Umbu. No, it should be the Umbu of Hokage. Speaking of which, this was actually a bit excessive for Jiraiya's identity, but now was not the time to care about such things. Obviously, the Umbu was also affected by Jiraiya's serious face. He bowed his head very respectfully and said seriously to Jiraiya, Umbu of Hokage, listen to my order. After a little hesitation, Jiraiya finally gave the order. From now on, Woodleaf Village will enter the highest level of combat readiness. All the ninjas and Umbu in Konoha now began to act, guiding the civilians in Konoha and the children in the ninja school. Do everything possible to guide them all to a safe place and preserve the fire for Woodleaf Village. Our enemy this time is unusual. It is likely to be a full-scale invasion by the Akatsuki. So I hope the Umbu will do their best to guard the Nine Tails, Column Force and Uzumaki Naruto. No, Tsunade, I hope you can guard Uzumaki Naruto directly. In case of any emergency, directly take Uzumaki Naruto away from Woodleaf through reverse summoning and go to Shikatsu Forest to seek the protection of Katsuyu. When they heard the term, highest level of combat readiness, from Jiraiya's mouth, Hokage's Umbu, who was kneeling beside Jiraiya, and Tsunade, who was standing beside Jiraiya, also became serious. Only Shizun, who had been traveling with Tsunade all year round, was a little confused, but now was not the time to answer Shizun's questions. The highest level of combat readiness means that Woodleaf Village has faced with the threat of direct extermination. Everyone can only choose to fight to the death and fight to keep the fire of Woodleaf. When she heard Jiraiya's order to protect Uzumaki Naruto, Tsunade knew that Jiraiya was ready to face the upcoming enemy by herself. After years of fighting together, Tsunade has understood Jiraiya's character. Making such a decision proves that Jiraiya is ready to fight to the death. But as a ninja from Woodleaf Village, Tsunade's love for Woodleaf is not inferior to anyone, so even if she was reluctant to leave Tsunade, she still didn't say anything to refuse. After confirming all the orders from Jiraiya, the Umbu directly disappeared from Hokage's office. Apparently, he went to convey Jiraiya's orders. After all, Woodleaf Ninja Village is an organization responsible for war. When encountering special situations, their response is very poor. From the time the Umbu left Hokage's office to the time the whole village acted, it was only a minute or two. Be sure to live, promise me. Tsunade stood beside Jiraiya and said to him very seriously. After decades of getting along, the feelings between Jiraiya and Tsunade are difficult for ordinary people to understand. Even the reason why Tsunade has been unwilling to accept Jiraiya before is partly because the feelings between the two of them are so deep that Tsunade is reluctant to let any unpredictable changes happen between the two of them. In the face of life and death, all the disguises are taken off. In Tsunade's eyes, there is only deep love and inseparable attachment to Jiraiya. Such emotions were naturally seen by Jiraiya. He reached out and held Tsunade's hand tightly. Jiraiya said to Tsunade seriously, "Don't worry, I will come back. I still have so many agreements with you, and I still owe you so many promises. If I just let go." Before Jiraiya finished speaking, Tsunade directly pressed his mouth. Tsunade shook her head. Obviously, she didn't want Jiraiya to say anything bad before the war begins. Understanding Tsunade's meaning, Jiraiya slowly shook his head, took Tsunade's hand off his mouth, didn't speak, just nodded very seriously. At this moment, all words seemed to have become pale. The two of them only looked at each other for a long time. Finally, Jiraiya forced himself out of this atmosphere and said to Tsunade very seriously, "The goal of Akatsuki is the Bijou, so you must protect Shina Kushina and Naruto. Now that Watergate is training in Mount Mayaboku, the responsibility of protecting Shina Kushina and Naruto falls on us. Remember what I said, if something goes wrong, you must take Naruto and Shina Kushina to the Shikatsu forest. Woodleaf being destroyed is not as serious as Naruto being kidnapped." Although Jiraiya wasn't so clear about Akatsuki's specific plan, when he fought with Pain before, from Pain's words, Jiraiya naturally analyzed that Akatsuki wanted to gather all 9 Bijou and use them as a weapon to threaten the whole world. This situation is definitely more unacceptable to Jiraiya than Woodleaf being destroyed. "I understand. I'll go now." Tsunade opened the window of Hokage's office, jumped out of the window, and rushed to Watergate's house. Shizune naturally heard the order Jiraiya just issued to Umbu and followed Tsunade's footsteps out of Hokage's office, but she didn't go to Watergate's house. Instead, she went to Kiba Hospital to prepare to follow the medical ninjas of Kiba Hospital. Looking at the empty Hokage's office, Jiraiya bit his tongue and quickly used summoning jutsu to summon Fukasaku Sennin to his side. Fukasaku Sennin was suddenly summoned by Jiraiya, and he didn't know why, but Fukasaku Sennin, who has chakra Sennin, naturally has extremely powerful perception. The huge and familiar chakra above the wood leaf was naturally easily detected by Fukasaku Sennin. "Little Jiraiya, it seems that our last action was a bit useless." Chapter 475. "So, little Jiraiya, it seems that you didn't call me here to ask me and my wife to help you enter Sage Mode." Fukasaku Sennin looked around him and didn't see any trace of his wife, Shima Sennin. Fukasaku Sennin knew that Jiraiya didn't seem to summon him to enter Sage Mode. As an old man who has lived for a long time, Fukasaku Sennin naturally quickly understood Jiraiya's mind, so he said to Jiraiya, "It seems that you plan to fight against Pain alone?" Jiraiya naturally didn't intend to hide his thoughts in front of Fukasaku Sennin. He nodded and said to Fukasaku Sennin, "Last time, I used Sage Mode with you two to invade Amigakure. In such a situation, Pain was still able to save his life. He even recovered his strength in this short period of time, and now he appeared directly above Woodleaf. This proves that he has found a countermeasure to deal with Sage Mode, or my Sage Mode. So if I let you two enter Sage Mode with me to fight against Pain, it will still be a situation of 9 deaths and 1 life. In this case, I can't let you two take risks with me. Minato is still practicing Sage Mode in Mount Mayaboku. He still needs the help of the two of you. Watergate is the hope against Akatsuki. I'm just a slightly rotten old man. It's enough to do my last part for Woodleaf and Ninja World, isn't it?" Listening to Jiraiya's words, Fukasaku Sennin also noticed Jiraiya's will to die. Jiraiya is obviously ready to appear for Woodleaf and Ninja World. Such an idea is difficult to change even if Fukasaku Sennin says more, isn't it? Since he can't change Jiraiya's will to die, Fukasaku Sennin didn't want to say so much to persuade Jiraiya. Instead, he led the topic to Watergate, who was still practicing in Mount Mayaboku. "Don't worry, Jiraiya. Watergate has now cultivated Sage Mode to the final stage. During this period of time, Watergate has been working very hard. His talent is also very amazing. Although he hasn't completely completed the practice of Sage Mode, from the current signs, the Sage Mode that Watergate has practiced is very perfect. I'm just saying if you can delay Pain long enough, then Watergate is very likely to succeed in practicing Sage Mode and return to Woodleaf." Jiraiya naturally didn't doubt Fukasaku Sennin's words, but Jiraiya was still very worried. "Immortal, please don't tell Watergate about Woodleaf's current situation. Since he has already reached the final step of cultivating Immortal Mode, he naturally can't let all his previous efforts go to waste. I will also try my best to ensure that the shadow clone he left in Woodleaf doesn't have a chance to pass the information to his main body. Please grant me this, may be my last wish." Jiraiya, who knows that he is about to face a situation where there is no chance of survival, still thinks about his disciple in the end? Fukasaku Sennin was also a little speechless for a while. An inexplicable emotion was brewing in Fukasaku Sennin's heart. This emotion made Fukasaku Sennin feel very uncomfortable. Little Jiraiya, remember my words, don't be so desperate. As long as you can delay long enough, there is still a chance to turn the tables. Don't give up your life so easily, do you understand what I mean? Fukasaku Sennin looked at Jiraiya very seriously. From the bottom of his heart, Fukasaku Sennin didn't want Jiraiya to sacrifice himself, so before leaving, Fukasaku Sennin still told Jiraiya not to give up his life easily. Watching Fukasaku Sennin turn into a cloud of smoke and disappear in front of him, Jiraiya was just about to move to seal Watergate's shadow clone in Woodleaf, so that Watergate couldn't get the information that Woodleaf was invaded, but a strong vibration suddenly appeared. Pain, who was suspended in the air, looked down at Konoha under his feet as if he was looking down at ants. He opened his hands and embraced the whole sky like a god embracing the world. With a tone of indifference and undeniable majesty, a short word came out from Pain's mouth, Super Shinra Tensei. Directly below Pain, a powerful repulsive force was generated on the ground. It was like a heavy hammer constantly hitting everything around him, whether it was the ground or the buildings, they were constantly smashed and then pushed by the repulsive force. A torrent formed by the wreckage of the houses and the soil suddenly appeared, the pit on the ground became bigger and bigger, and the range of Woodleaf destruction also became larger and larger. The strong vibration that Jiraiya just felt came from Pain's ninjutsu, Super Shinra Tensei, which was beyond common sense. Jiraiya immediately escaped from the building where Hokage's office was located and jumped a few times to the shadow rock at the commanding height of Woodleaf. Looking at the huge attack range that seemed to be constantly expanding, Jiraiya only felt his heart trembling. This is the place where he grew up. Although he left for many years, some changes have happened in many places. But when Jiraiya walked on Woodleaf, he always felt a familiar feeling. Woodleaf is his home. But his home was directly reduced to such a broken state under the attack of others? A flame full of anger and sadness burned in Jiraiya's heart, making Jiraiya's hatred for Akatsuki and Pain become stronger. They have touched one of the biggest taboos in Jiraiya's heart. At this moment, Jiraiya had no intention of blocking the news from Watergate and helping Woodleaf Ninja rescue. Jiraiya just wanted to find Pain quickly and use his fist and ninjutsu to let Pain know how fierce the flame in his heart was. Burn Pain's body with the fire of his heart. Pain, who was floating in the sky, seemed to feel that his ninjutsu had caused enough effect. Although he could more than double the attack range, this was not Pain's purpose. Capturing the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki is the real purpose of invading Konoha. Before that, he must ensure that he has enough power to fight against the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, or the Kyuubi's own power. So Pain manipulated the gravity to let his figure fall slowly. After a while, he was already standing on the ground that had been destroyed and turned into ruins. Chapter 476. Looking at the ruins in front of him, Naruto couldn't react in time. Just a moment ago, everything was so normal. He stayed at home and chatted with his mother casually. But suddenly, a violent vibration came from the ground. Lascivious Sage's wife, Tsunade, suddenly appeared in his house, and without any explanation, she took his mother and himself to the periphery of Konoha. Behind them, the torrent formed by the ruins spread like a tide. His house and the familiar streets around his house were destroyed in an instant. On the way to evacuate, Naruto saw many of his neighbors were crushed under the ruins. Naruto knew that his neighbors were ordinary people, and it was impossible for them to get out of the huge concrete slabs. How Naruto wished he could help his weak neighbors out of their predicament, but when Naruto was about to take action, he was stopped by his mother and Tsunade at the same time. If it was according to Naruto's usual character, no matter who stopped him, Naruto would definitely save those who needed to be saved. But maybe it's the terrifying scene that suddenly appeared in front of him, or maybe it's the serious look of his mother and Tsunade, or maybe it's the fear in his heart that can't be dispelled. Naruto can only run around like a mouse trying to survive. He doesn't know what's going on, but Naruto can only run around like a mouse trying to survive. Shina Kushina, I will send you and Naruto to the Shikatsu forest. Katsuki will be responsible for the safety of the two of you. Now for Woodleaf, these buildings, these ninjas aren't as important as the two of you. You must ensure your own safety, do you understand what I mean? Tsunade looked at Shina Kushina and said seriously. When Tsunade said Naruto's name, Shina Kushina dug out some important information that Watergate occasionally revealed to her. Akatsuki Organization, such an organization that had their eyes on his wife and his children. Even if Minato paid attention to secrecy, he still intentionally or unintentionally revealed a lot of relevant information about this kind of matter that was closely related to his family. Don't worry, Tsunade-sama. Now that Watergate is not in the village, the task of protecting the village can only be handed over to you and Jiraiya-sensei. Please pay attention to your own safety. Otherwise, I don't know how much Minato will blame himself when he returns. Tsunade glanced at Shina Kushina and didn't say anything. She just nodded her head gently, but didn't give any promise to Shina Kushina. Shina Kushina also seemed to be aware of her slip of the tongue. After all, it was an important period for Woodleaf to resist the foreign enemy, so it was indeed inappropriate for her to say such willful words. In silence, Tsunade quickly printed hand seals, and the reverse summoning technique was quickly completed. After a burst of smoke, Naruto and Shina Kushina disappeared. Tsunade looked at the center of the destruction, and two figures were faintly visible. Tsunade really hoped that she could reinforce Jiraiya, but now the place that needed her most was not the center of the battlefield, but Kiba Hospital. This sudden attack like a natural disaster must have caused a lot of injuries to Konoha civilians and ninjas. He must do his best to help these injured people recover from their injuries and face the possible invasion in the future. After meeting with many medical ninjas in Kiba Hospital, Tsunade immediately summoned a large number of slugs, so that each medical ninja had at least one slug clone. As long as they encountered a troublesome injury that was difficult to solve, these medical ninjas could put the slugs on the seriously injured person, and Tsunade would remotely use her own medical ninjutsu to treat these seriously injured people. Pain, although I knew that you would invade Konoha one day, I didn't expect that this day would come so soon, so soon. Jiraiya looked at Pain standing opposite him, and said with a slightly dignified expression, but I didn't expect you to be so ruthless. Although there are many ninjas in Woodleaf, there are many civilians who can't guarantee their lives. Do you know how many civilians will be injured or even lose their lives with such a large-scale attack? Pain, is this your so-called way to save the ninja world? In Jiraiya's ears, it seems that the sound of injured people and the sound of blood gushing out of the dead people constantly echoed. It's not that Jiraiya hasn't seen a bloodier scene, but such a large-scale slaughter of civilians is extremely rare in the ninja world. Most ninjas will follow the unspoken rule of not hurting civilians as much as possible, but this time Pain did too much. Such an excessive action is unacceptable to Jiraiya, and it made Jiraiya angry. But hearing Jiraiya's angry question or reprimand, Pain didn't seem to be moved at all. He looked at Jiraiya and said coldly to Jiraiya, for long-term peace, what's wrong with making such a small sacrifice? Pain's plain tone made Jiraiya even angrier. Who do you think you are? You can treat the lives of such people as a number, as a sacrifice that can be abandoned at will? Who am I? Pain looked at Jiraiya and said very indifferently, I told you a long time ago, I am a person who walks in the world on behalf of God, in other words, I am God. Jiraiya originally wanted to let Pain or Nagato know that what he did was not a good thing before he started, but the more he talked about Pain's attitude of treating human life as nothing, the angrier Jiraiya felt. Since there is nothing to say, he can only use his fist to prove that he is right, right? Rushing towards Pain, the two of them began a close combat, one with bare hands and the other with a black iron rod. Jiraiya fought back and forth, and even with his many years of combat experience, Jiraiya even had a certain advantage. But Jiraiya's heart couldn't relax at all, because Jiraiya knew that Tendo in front of him was only a part of Pain's Rikudo. There are more forces that have not been taken out by Nagato, or they are fighting in other places of the wood leaf. Such a guess appeared in Jiraiya's heart, making Jiraiya more and more anxious. Chapter 477. While Jiraiya and Pain were fighting, Tsunade used the slug clones she summoned to heal the injured civilians and ninjas in the wood leaf. In a slightly remote corner of the wood leaf, it looked so abrupt at this moment. This was because the surroundings of the mansion were clearly in ruins, but the mansion didn't seem to be damaged at all. If one took a closer look at this house that was out of place with its surroundings, it wouldn't be difficult to discover that this house was covered by a thin layer of barrier. A kind of power from the heaven and earth seemed to be under the control of someone to protect this house. This courtyard was Nangongjia's home. Naturally, Nangongja, who could also control natural energy, had already sensed Pain's presence when he appeared above the wood leaf and began to accumulate energy. However, Nangongja did not choose to rush to Woodleaf's aid. Instead, he hurriedly brought his family back to his home. After arranging Nangongro, Mashiro, and Little Linger to a relatively safe place in his house, Nangongja stood in his courtyard and stuck his tribulation sword in the middle of the courtyard. Channeling a large amount of natural energy into the defensive formation he had set up around the courtyard earlier, it was amplified by the natural energy. The originally extremely powerful formation was almost 300% effective. Even Tendo Pain's Super Shinra Tensei could only shake the defensive formation a little. The door of Nangongja's house was slowly opened from the inside as if they had sensed that the sudden calamitous attack had ended. Mashiro cautiously peeked his head out from the door, as he asked Nangongja who was standing in the courtyard. "Gong gong. What's the situation?" As soon as he finished this sentence, Mashiro saw the ruins piled up like a mountain outside his house because he was standing at a slightly higher position. Although Mashiro can be considered to be experienced and knowledgeable, he usually saw a scene of dozens or hundreds of people fighting at most. Compared to this scene of blood and wailing everywhere, it was simply a small thing. Mashiro lightly covered her mouth, as if she was trying to suppress the scream that was about to come out of her mouth. But after hearing Mashiro's question, Nangongja still looked at the empty place in front of him with a serious face. He didn't look back, but his tone was extremely serious as he said to Mashiro. "Mashiro, go back now, take Mashiro and Little Linger to the basement I prepared for you." He immediately activated all the formations in the room. Immediately. Now. Nangongja's sudden order caught Mashiro off guard. But after a long time of relying on Nangongja and respecting Nangongja's orders, Mashiro instinctively rushed into his house, bringing Little Linger and Mashiro to the mysterious basement that Nangongja usually wouldn't let them enter. Mashiro didn't know how powerful this basement was, but Nangongja was very clear about it. When Nangongja first subdued the Blood Garment Pavilion and returned to the Wood Leaf, Nangongja was actually worried about whether the Wood Leaf could completely guarantee the safety of his family. So after Nangongja gained the ability, he referred to various ancient books and secret techniques from the Blood Garment Pavilion and built a secret room for himself in his house. This secret room wasn't big, but Nangongja carved at least a few hundred defensive and counterattack formations in it. As long as all the formations were activated, Nangongja might not be able to forcibly break through them even if he used all his strength. He might even be seriously injured due to the various formations. This was the last resort Nangongja prepared for his family. If there was something he couldn't solve, Nangongja would use all his strength to directly activate the spatial jump formation carved on the outside of this secret room. He would directly transfer this secret room to the Lion Clan's alternate space. He believed that this would ensure the safety of his family, right? Knowing that he had nothing to worry about, Nangongja finally slowly pulled out the long sword he stabbed into the ground and pointed the tip of his sword at an empty space in front of him. His words were cold and sharp. Nangongja slowly said, "That's right. Since you're here, then show yourself. In front of a swordsman, all dirty tricks are laughable. That's right, Nangongja felt that someone had invaded his home. That's why he immediately let Mashiro bring Little Linger and Nangong Ro to the secret room he had prepared. On one hand, it was to ensure the safety of his family, on the other hand, it was to make himself less restrained in battle. After Nangongja's voice fell, the space in front of him slowly distorted. A figure wearing a whirlpool mask and a black uniform with red clouds stood in front of Nangongja. Only one of his eyes was revealed as he looked at Nangongja with a smile that wasn't a smile. Hoodlum. Regarding the information of Akatsuki organization, Nangongja had always personally checked it. Regarding this person who had suddenly appeared in Akatsuki organization, and there was almost no other information about him, Nangongja was also very cautious. Because in Nangongja's view, Pain or Nagato wasn't the kind of person who was particularly good at scheming and scheming. In the eyes of such a person who regarded himself as God, perhaps no amount of scheming was more useful than his ability to surpass the common people. But in these years, the Akatsuki was silent, and even used a lot of dirty tricks to seize benefits for themselves. Such things didn't sound like something Pain would do. Therefore, Nangongja boldly guessed that perhaps there was a person who was good at scheming in the Akatsuki, giving advice and strategizing for Pain and the Akatsuki. And after Hoodlum appeared, this guess became more and more trustworthy. But Nangongja didn't have time to confirm all of this. Hoodlum had already appeared in front of him. The obvious spatial fluctuations were enough to prove that Hoodlum was a person who was proficient in spatial ninjutsu. This was really a headache. As someone who understood Watergate and had touched the surface of spatial abilities, Nangongja fully understood how difficult and terrifying it was to deal with a person who was proficient in spatial ninjutsu. For such a person, challenging someone of a higher level and insta-killing someone was simply a common occurrence. There was nothing to be surprised about. Chapter 478. It's rare for the famous Woodleaf King of Hell to remember a nobody like me. Should I feel honored? Hoodlum looked at Nangongja with a hint of mockery. Just as Hoodlum had said, he was a nameless person. But it was precisely because he was a nobody that people feared. To be able to hide everything and carry out their actions silently in the dark, such a person was more frightening than those ambitious people who stood in the open. What's your purpose? Seeing Hoodlum appear directly in front of him without attacking, Nangongja knew that Hoodlum must have something to say or conditions to discuss with him. Therefore, Nangongja didn't want to pretend to be polite with Hoodlum and directly talked about the topic. When Hoodlum saw Nangongja's attitude, he let out a soft laugh and said to Nangongja, "I can see that you're a Woodleaf King of Hell. Even though you're called the Woodleaf King of Hell, I can see that you're not brainwashed by the Woodleaf King of Hell. You don't see the Woodleaf King of Hell as everything you want to protect. After Pain attacked, you didn't respond to the Woodleaf King of Hell's call and chose to stay at home to protect your family." Nangongja didn't want to deny Hoodlum's words. After all, even though Nangongja occasionally helped the Woodleaf King of Hell, it was because the Woodleaf King of Hell paid a price. Or rather, it was because Nangongja felt like it. Nangongja was never a person who would sacrifice his life to protect the Woodleaf King of Hell. For Nangongja, the only people he could sacrifice his life for were his family members. Other than his family members and people he recognized, the others were dispensable. Even though it sounded cruel and cold-blooded, Nangongja wasn't ashamed at all because this was the path that Nangongja chose for himself. Continue. After hearing Nangongja's words, Hoodlum felt that he had grasped the rhythm of the conversation with Nangongja. Thus, he slowly nodded and continued to speak to Nangongja. "I came here to make a simple deal with someone like you who is called King of Hell. Our Akatsuki's goal is very simple, which is to obtain the Nine Tails column force from the Woodleaf village. There is no direct conflict between us. I came here to see you in the hope that you won't have any direct conflict with us during this period. After all, as the head of the Blood Pavilion who cultivates internal chi, you don't have much of a relationship with us ninjas. Continue living your life of hell's life. Continue to enjoy your indifferent life. Hoodlum, Nangong Zhan Nangong, Nangong Zha King of Hell Hell Hell. King of Hell 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 Hell. In the past, when Nangong Zha wasn't that strong, in order to make a living, Nangong Zha was in the limelight. However, when Nangong Zha's strength and influence started to expand, Nangong Zha didn't show much ambition. On the contrary, he seemed to like living in seclusion in his own home and didn't have too much entanglement with others. Therefore, Hoodlum aimed at this point and raised his request. This kind of situation wouldn't harm Nangong Zha's interests and would be beneficial to him. Wasn't this exactly what the two of them wanted? Originally, Hoodlum thought that Nangong Zha would gladly accept his conditions. However, he discovered that Nangong Zha didn't loosen his grip on his sword. Instead, he tightened his grip on it. Hoodlum's brows under his mask frowned. What did he say to provoke Nangong Zha? Hoodlum, huh. Just as I expected, you are a qualified schemer and politician. It seems like before you came looking for me, you did a lot of research to understand my temperament and personality. Then, you came up with suitable words to persuade me to agree to your request. Perhaps all of this seems natural to you, right? After all, I don't have any feelings for Woodleaf, and I don't care about those who aren't familiar with me. However, you guessed wrong. You shouldn't use my family's safety to threaten me, or my friends' lives to threaten me. Your words are very careful, but I can still hear the danger in you and your unscrupulous attitude. The more you say, the more obvious your attitude is. I don't mind others analyzing my character, but I don't like people making decisions for me even more. Since you have become a huge threat to my family and myself, then eliminating all threats has always been my favorite way of doing things. What Nangong Zha said was illogical, and even sounded a little unreasonable like a bandit. But after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't difficult to find that Nangong Zha's actions were actually in line with Nangong Zha's usual behavior. However, these emotional changes in Nangong Zha's heart were meaningless to Hoodlum. Hoodlum could analyze Nangong Zha's character, but there was no way to control Nangong Zha's thoughts or control Nangong Zha's soul. It's really troublesome. Seeing Nangong Zha's expression of wanting to get rid of him, Hoodlum could only say this once again. Why do people nowadays like to do things that don't conform to common sense? Itachi was already dead, but Sasuke didn't evolve Manjikyu Sharingan as he expected. Instead, he transplanted Itachi's eyes into Manjikyu Sharingan. And Nangong Zha, who was standing in front of him, was even more out of his expectations. Obviously, there were no conditions that could threaten Nangong Zha's interests, but Nangong Zha didn't hesitate to start a war with him. At this moment, he looked like he was full of fighting spirit. It was really as Hoodlum had said, everything was so troublesome. Hoodlum took out a scroll from his arms and looked coldly at Nangong Zha. Originally, everything was negotiable, but since you're so uncooperative. In order to prevent you from becoming a threat to my future plans, it's better for me to eliminate you directly. Hoodlum tore open the scroll in his hand, and 2 clouds of smoke appeared next to him. After the smoke dissipated, 2 doppelgangers of the 6 paths appeared before Nangong Zha. They had orange hair and wore black uniforms with red clouds on them. Their faces were densely packed with black iron rods that would make one's hair stand on end. Chapter 479. The 2 Rikudo clones standing opposite Nangong Zha were Pain and Pain of Azura, who had been destroyed by Jiraiya but had been restored. These 2 Rikudo clones were chosen by Pain and Hoodlum after careful discussion. They were the 2 most effective clones to deal with Nangong Zha, aside from Pain of Tendo. Rendo was good at close combat. Coupled with his special ability to extract souls, Rendo was a big killer in close combat. On the other hand, Nangong Zha himself was a martial artist who cultivated internal strength. Although he also had a long-range and close-range attack like Sword Chi, he would still choose to engage in close-range combat due to his instinctive attacking methods. Therefore, the human Dao was actually very suitable to deal with Nan Gongxia's 6 paths doppelgangers. Pain of Azura was a long-range attacker who was good at using a variety of firearms. The barrage of bullets and the range of missiles were also very troublesome for an internal strength practitioner like Nan Gongxia. Although the damage of bullets and missiles was limited for Nan Gongxia, they could still play a role in restraining him. If Pain of Tendo could also participate in this battle, he could use his gravity and repulsion to control Nan Gongxia's movements. He could then form a circle with Rendo and Pain of Azura to suppress Nan Gongxia. However, this attack on Woodleaf wasn't to eliminate Nan Gongxia, but to capture Nine Tails. Therefore, Pain naturally had to focus more on Naruto. Even the 2 Rikudo clones summoned by Hoodlum were only a backup plan. The best situation was naturally for Nan Gongxia to accept Hoodlum's suggestion, but Hoodlum didn't seem to be ready to show his true strength, so Nagato decided that if things didn't work out, he could only transfer 2 6 paths clones from the already compact combat force to cooperate with Hoodlum to restrain Nan Gongxia. After a short moment of sluggishness, the Rikudo clones began to observe their surroundings. When Pain saw Nan Gongxia standing in front of him with a face full of battle intent and a black longsword in his hand reflecting a different kind of brilliance under the sunlight, his expression was still very calm. However, he couldn't help but say to Hoodlum in a helpless tone, "Don't worry. It seems like your plan has failed. Scheming is just a small matter. In the end, you still need to use force to solve all problems." Being ridiculed by Pain of Rendo, Hoodlum didn't show much disappointment. After all, Hoodlum had a certain degree of vigilance against Pain. After Pain's 2 Rikudo clones appeared, Hoodlum didn't act as confident as he did in front of Nan Gongxia. "I don't know how this Nan Gongxia's brain works. It's obviously a win-win proposition, but he rejected it. I can't do anything about it." After saying that, Hoodlum even spread out his hands to show his helplessness. If Pain didn't know that collecting tailed beasts was one of Hoodlum's firm goals, he might have thought that Hoodlum was deliberately provoking Nan Gongxia so that Nan Gongxia could wear down his strength. Such a sinister idea seemed a bit inconceivable. After all, how could there be internal strife in the face of a powerful enemy? But Pain, who knows Hoodlum very well, can tell everyone very seriously that according to Hoodlum's usual behavior, this kind of thing is just child's play. Scheming, eloquence, and other things are as simple as eating and drinking for a person like Hoodlum. As long as it's to achieve his goals, there's no price that Hoodlum can't pay, no dignity that Hoodlum can't abandon, and no means that Hoodlum can't use. Pain doesn't know what kind of environment created such a person like Hoodlum, but Pain has a deep fear of such a person who is temporarily his ally. As for the legendary Uchiha Madara that Hoodlum has been talking about, Nagato didn't believe it from the beginning. How could a person who can pacify the war of the shinobi world with his own strength and establish Woodleaf Village with the shinobi god Senja Takuma be such a person who only knows how to scheme? Just when Hoodlum and Pain were looking at each other, Nan Gongxia's voice broke the strange atmosphere between Pain and Hoodlum. "I say, are you done yet? I generously let you gather your strength. I want to see what kind of powerful ninja the Akatsuki's god, and the one behind the scenes is. But your affectionate gaze makes me wonder if there's something wrong with your orientation?" Nan Gongxia's tone was filled with indescribable disgust and disdain. It seems that in Nan Gongxia's heart, Hoodlum and Pain may have cooperated because of each other's twisted orientation. Although they knew that Nan Gongxia deliberately used such words to anger the two of them, making them lose their minds in the following battle. But Hoodlum and Pain were still angered by Nan Gongxia's words. Needless to say, how could a person who regards himself as a god accept a mortal questioning him? Although Hoodlum's face was covered by a mask, it was obvious that Hoodlum's aura was fluctuating at the moment, fully showing that his heart was not calm at all. He also had a woman he loved the most, and even his current actions could be said to be for the sake of his beloved woman who had left this world. For Hoodlum, this person was a taboo that no one could touch. Although Nan Gongxia's words had another meaning, it was still unbearable for Hoodlum. Courting death. courting death. Although the two of them were still suspicious of each other, because of Nan Gongjia's intentional words, they joined forces and simultaneously declared their intention to attack Nan Gongjia. Looking at Ren Jiandao and Hoodlum charging toward him, as well as the densely packed gun and cannon muzzles on Azura's body, the corners of Nan Gongjia's lips curled up slightly. How long has it been since I last fought with my full strength? Although Nan Gongjia really liked to stay at home and spend his days with his family, as a martialist, Nan Gongjia's blood was also filled with the desire to fight. Nan Gongjia's body actually started to tremble from excitement when the three people who were at or above the shadow level launched their attacks at him at the same time. His blood was boiling at this moment. Chapter 480. Behind Mount Mayaboku, Watergate, who was sitting cross-legged and cultivating sage mode, suddenly had his calm aura disrupted. Watergate's eyebrows knitted together beautifully. The fluctuation of his spirit caused the immortal technique chakra, which was constantly harmonizing in Watergate's body, to become restless. The balance between natural energy, physical energy, and spiritual energy was instantly broken. Watergate's skin also began to slowly turn into a toad-like bluish-gray color. Pieces of flesh quietly appeared on Watergate's cheeks. Seeing the changes in Watergate, Shima Sennin, who was squatting on the side with a thick wooden stick in her hand, immediately took action. Her petite body leaped up high and fiercely knocked Watergate's head with the wooden stick in her hand, forcing all the berserk natural energy in Watergate's body out of his body. When the natural energy was completely expelled, Watergate's constantly changing body finally returned to its original state. When the natural energy in his body was forcibly expelled due to his failure to harmonize the natural energy, some of his physical energy and spiritual energy would also be expelled from his body. Therefore, Watergate's face had become somewhat pale, and he seemed to be somewhat weak. However, Watergate didn't seem to care about how bad his physical condition was, because at this moment, Watergate's eyes were full of anger. Such anger lingered in Watergate's heart, making it difficult for Watergate to get rid of it. He could only stare into the distance with a pair of red eyes. The anger in his eyes even had a feeling that it was about to burst out. Watergate brat, what's wrong with you? You haven't had such a serious natural energy outbreak since the end of the first stage of cultivation. Shima Sennin actually regarded Watergate as her nephew. She asked with a bit of anxiety and a bit of affection. Minato, who was usually modest and polite, had completely lost his usual little son attitude. Instead, he stood up angrily and yelled towards the sky, "What are you doing? What are you going to do? Pain, I, Watergate, swear to kill you. Swear to kill you." Seeing Watergate's abnormal appearance, Shima Sennin's eyes were full of worry. When she heard Watergate say the name Pain, Shima Sennin couldn't help but have a feeling of fear in her heart. As if something bad had happened, she wanted to go forward and say something to Watergate to calm him down. However, when Watergate was meditating, Fukasaku Sennin, who was suddenly summoned, appeared behind him and put his hand on his wife. Fukasaku Sennin's body. Obviously, Fukasaku Sennin already had a plan in his heart. After shouting a few times towards the sky, Watergate seemed to have finally calmed down the excitement in his heart. Although there was still anger in his eyes, he had obviously calmed down. Seeing that Watergate had calmed down, Fukasaku Sennin also took a few steps forward with a dignified expression and came in front of Watergate. "It seems that, you already know what happened in Woodleaf, right?" When Watergate heard Fukasaku Sennin's words, he immediately stared at Fukasaku Sennin. Although he didn't speak, the meaning in his eyes was obviously hoping that Fukasaku Sennin, who seemed to know everything, would explain it to him. "Just now, when you were still cultivating, little Jiraiya suddenly summoned me." With a bit of pain, Fukasaku Sennin said to Watergate with a dignified expression. "It seems that everything happened so suddenly that little Jiraiya didn't have time to block your shadow clone's actions, so your shadow clone sent you the information about Woodleaf." "That's right." At this moment, Pain is attacking Woodleaf Village. I left early, so I don't know what scale of invasion Woodleaf has suffered, but judging from your reaction, Woodleaf must have suffered heavy losses at the moment. Please let me go back and fight with my sensei. With a bit of firmness and a bit of pleading, Watergate said to Fukasaku Sennin. Mount Mayaboku is actually a relatively independent space. Without the permission of these toads of Mount Mayaboku, Watergate can't leave Mount Mayaboku at will. When Sensei fought with Pain before, I couldn't feel it in time. But at that time, Sensei used Sage Mode, but the situation was still so miserable. This time, you and Shima Sennin didn't leave, so there is no way for Jiraiya to enter Sage Mode when he came. In this case, Sensei still wants to fight with Pain. What's the difference between that and death? In the end, Watergate's voice has become no different from a roar because of anger and excitement. But Fukasaku Sennin didn't feel angry because of Watergate's rudeness. At this moment, Fukasaku Sennin's heart was also full of anger. At this moment, the anger brought by Watergate's roar was simply dispensable compared to the anger in Fukasaku Sennin's heart at this moment. Jumping high from the ground, Fukasaku Sennin clenched his toad into the shape of a fist and punched directly on Watergate's head. The fist with anger and chakra directly knocked Watergate down. Watergate could only sit on the ground, looking at Fukasaku Sennin. He didn't seem to understand why Fukasaku Sennin suddenly hit him. Do you think I'm willing to watch Jiraiya fight with Pain? Jiraiya is also a child I watched grow up step by step. If I could choose, I would rather fight with Jiraiya now. But I can't, because I have more important things to do. That is to let you master Sage Mode, so you can grasp the opportunity to defeat Pain. Jiraiya can only master Sage Mode to an imperfect level because of his aptitude. The imperfect Sage Mode makes it impossible for Jiraiya to gain more power, but you are different. According to your current situation, the Sage Mode you practice is almost miraculously perfect. If you master the perfect Sage Mode, we may be able to end the Son of War and eliminate this war that swept the shinobi world. When Jiraiya's life and the lives of all the people in the entire shinobi world are on the same scale, what should I choose? If it's rational, naturally the whole shinobi world is more important. But if it's emotional, I really don't want Jiraiya to lose his life like this. I was so hesitant, so I didn't know how to choose. So I endured the grief in my heart and returned to Mount Mayaboku. In order to let you master Sage Mode as soon as possible, so that I can get the best of both worlds. Watergate boy, do you understand what I mean? Chapter 481. After listening to Fukasaku Sennin's words, Watergate finally stabilized his emotions completely. Whether it was anger or sadness, they were all removed from Watergate's eyes, or they were forcibly suppressed. Because Watergate knew that no matter how sad and angry he was, it didn't make any sense. He wouldn't let Pain suffer any harm, and he would lose the opportunity to save Woodleaf and his sensei. The focus of everything is still on Sage Mode. As long as he succeeds in practicing it, then everything will be solved. After figuring out the key points, Watergate also stood in the place where he meditated before. But Watergate knew that it was impossible to master Sage Mode in a short time with his current practice speed, so Watergate suddenly remembered the practice method Naruto showed when he practiced wind release with his child before. Ninjutsu, multiple shadow clone technique. Clouds of smoke were produced around Watergate. When the smoke dissipated, it could be seen that Watergate had summoned 9 shadow clones through shadow clone technique, plus Watergate himself. A total of 10 Watergate were standing there. Watergate, you are, looking at Watergate suddenly creating his own shadow clones, Fukasaku Sennin seemed to be thinking about the meaning of Watergate's actions. But soon, Fukasaku Sennin understood Minato's intention. The shadow clone jutsu could reflect all his experiences back to his original body. So, wouldn't it be twice the effort for half the result if he used the shadow clone jutsu? But after Fukasaku Sennin thought of the advantages brought by shadow clone technique, he also thought of the adverse effects after excessive use of shadow clone technique. A lot of fatigue and chakra consumption are fed back to the main body, which is likely to cause the main body to faint or even deeper damage. Fukasaku Sennin understood these things, and Watergate was naturally more clear. But looking at Watergate's resolute appearance now, it was obvious that he also calculated the damage to himself. Immortals, I'll have to trouble you to watch over my cultivation. Bowing slightly to Fukasaku Sennin and Shima Sennin, Watergate led his 9 shadow clones to sit on the ground and began to guide natural energy into his body, mixing it into chakra mode, allowing himself to practice sage mode. Fukasaku Sennin and Shima Sennin looked at Watergate, who was sitting on the ground and had begun to harmonize the natural energy, and then looked at each other and shook their heads helplessly. After that, they could only walk toward the place where Watergate was sitting cross-legged with a stick in their hands. In the courtyard of Nangongjia's house, Nangongja and Pain were fighting in close combat. Because of his special ability, Pain mostly used his palms to fight against Nangongjia's sword when he attacked. It must be known that Heaven's Retribution sword with sword energy was extremely sharp, but Pain also seemed to have an extremely deep experience in using his palms to fight against sharp weapons. Every time Nangongja used his swordsmanship against Pain, Pain always used his palms to avoid Nangongja's Heaven's Retribution sword. And Nangongja was naturally happy to see that his opponent was such a ninja who was good at close combat. Only such an experienced and powerful taijutsu ninja could hone his swordsmanship. So in fact, when Nangongja fought with Pain, he didn't go all out. After all, he didn't have to win the battle against Hoodlum and Pain's Rikudo. In fact, Nangongja also took this opportunity to vent his excessive desire to fight. At the same time, he helped Woodleaf to contain the invading enemy. It could be considered as reporting back to the people who lived in Woodleaf over the years. Seeing Nangongja and Pain fighting back and forth, Hoodlum seemed to be impatient. A Rikudo clone was able to tie down Nangongja so tightly. Then, if the opportunity was right, would he be able to eliminate Nangongja, such a threat? For Hoodlum, Nangongja was indeed an unstable factor. This was because ever since Nangongja entered his peak, he rarely fought. Most of the time, he stayed at home. Hoodlum didn't have a very clear estimate of Nangongja's strength. Hoodlum felt that he couldn't easily let go of a person who he didn't understand and had such a strong strength. So Hoodlum's body disappeared from where he was originally standing and suddenly appeared behind Nangongja. In his hand, he was holding a kunai. Obviously, he was prepared to take advantage of the fact that Nangongja was tied down by Nangongja. But after seeing Hoodlum's actions, whether it was Pain or Pain's face had some inexplicable strange expressions. It was like a child who was playing a prank. Their eyes contained a bit of slyness and schadenfreude. And Nangongja naturally also noticed Hoodlum, who suddenly appeared behind him. Originally, Nangongja was able to fight to his heart's content with Pain's taijutsu, but at this moment, he was slightly unhappy. Originally, he wanted to fight with Pain and let himself relax. After that, he was too lazy to care about what these Akatsuki ninjas were doing. But now, Hoodlum actually appeared behind him and was prepared to attack him. Nangongja couldn't turn a blind eye to this. This guy. Glancing at Hoodlum, who was standing behind him, Nangongja's eyebrows slightly wrinkled together. Obviously, he was somewhat unhappy. Teach him a lesson. The speed of Heaven's disaster sword in his hand increased. The sword shadow began to become more and more blurred. As the sword speed became faster and faster, sword chi actually split from Heaven's disaster sword. 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 4, 4 turned into 8. At first glance, there was a kind of endless feeling. Scatter. The condensed sword chi around Heaven's disaster sword scattered under Nangongja's thought. Suddenly, they rushed towards Hoodlum, who was standing behind him. The sword chi wrapped around Hoodlum, blocking all his escape routes. And Hoodlum naturally also discovered that he was facing a dangerous situation. He wanted to use his space ninjutsu to escape, but when he was about to enter his space, a feeling of fear suddenly appeared in his heart. Hoodlum could only quickly cut off the connection between himself and the space. This feeling of crisis disappeared. Chapter 482. However, this didn't mean that Hoodlum was out of danger. After all, if he couldn't hide in his own space, he would have to rely on his own strength to resist the countless sword energy swords. Nangongzhe and Pain weren't sure if Hoodlum could withstand such an attack. However, such an attack was enough to make Hoodlum, who usually pretended to be mysterious, reveal some of his strength, right? Nangongzhe seemed to have expected that Hoodlum wouldn't be able to use his space ninjutsu in his sword energy formation. Seeing that Hoodlum was completely under his control, Nangongzhe divided his attention. While fighting with Pain, he controlled his sword energy to attack Hoodlum. Chaos. Although it looked complicated, the sword energy sword circling around Hoodlum seemed to become restless under Nangongzhe's control. Under Nangongzhe's control, the sword energy swords began to vibrate slowly. The originally transparent sword energy swords became more illusory and filled with a sharp aura. The sword chi swords were like butterflies flitting through flowers as they attacked Hoodlum. At the beginning, there were only a few swords attacking Hoodlum. With his taijutsu, Hoodlum was still able to dodge in the limited space in front of him. However, as time passed, more and more sword energy swords attacked Hoodlum. Hoodlum's space to dodge became smaller and smaller. When a sword brushed past Hoodlum's neck, Hoodlum knew that he could no longer hide his strength. Hoodlum opened his hands, and two strange white plant sprouts suddenly appeared in his palms. After coming into contact with the air, the two sprouts seemed to be stimulated by something and quickly grew. After a while, the two sprouts grew into twigs that were about 2 meters long and as thick as a wrist. Hoodlum grabbed the two strange white twigs in his hands and quickly waved them. The twigs seemed to have excellent toughness. When waved at high speed, they even had characteristics similar to whips. Hoodlum waved the two long and thick branches in his hands in a vigorous manner. Finally, he didn't have to be in such a difficult situation under the siege of Nangongzhe's sword formation. However, when they saw the strange twigs, whether it was Nangongzhe or Pain, both of them had a strange expression. As two people who had almost touched the core of the ninja world, Nangongzhe and Pain naturally recognized that Hoodlum was using the wood-release ninjutsu that was used by Woodleaf's first Hokage. However, whether it was Nangongzhe or Pain, both of them knew that Hoodlum was using the Uchiha clan's Sharingan to cast the spatial ability. Did he combine the power of the Uchiha and Senju, the enemies of the Uchiha clan? Although they didn't know who the real identity of this person was, now it seems that it is getting more and more interesting. Seeing that Hoodlum still had room to resist, Nangongzhe's bad taste slowly emerged. Aren't you deliberately hiding your strength? Since you are only willing to take out your trump card when you are forced into a desperate situation, then of course, I will satisfy your request and let you experience a crisis. Injecting his sword chi into the sword in his hand, a crescent-shaped sword chi rushed in the direction of Rendo. When Rendo saw that Nangongzhe suddenly forced him to retreat, he was very curious about what Nangongzhe would do next. Pain now understood that although Nangongzhe seemed to be full of fighting spirit, in fact, he didn't have any killing intent. What Nangongzhe wanted to do at the moment was to entangle the three of them and give Woodleaf a chance. Now Tendo Pain was entangled by Jiraiya, and Rendo Pain and Shirato Pain were also entangled by Nangongzhe. 3 of Pain's 6 paths were gone, but the remaining 3 Gakido, Jigakudo, and Chikashoto were not so easy to deal with. At least in the perception of Rendo, the other 4 6 paths doppelgangers who were not with him have not lost any of their members. In this case, even if they were entangled by Nangongzhe, what could they do? Doesn't it also mean that Nangongzhe is also trapped here? And Woodleaf has been attacked for so long, as the 4th Hokage, Namikaze Watergate has not appeared yet. Does it mean that Namikaze Watergate is not in the range of Woodleaf right now? There were only 3 Kage-level powerhouses in Woodleaf. Jiraiya was entangled by Tendo, Nangongja was entangled by the two of them and Hoodlum. Tsunade was already struggling to treat the wounded. As long as the other 3 Six Paths doppelgangers found any information about Naruto, then he would immediately send Konan, who was guarding him, to cooperate with the other 3 Six Paths doppelgangers to capture the 9 Tails who could only transform into Rokubi mode according to the information, Column Force, who had not fully opened the seal yet. In Pain's eyes, the goddess of victory had already begun to smile at him. No, he himself was a god walking in the human world. He did not need the goddess of victory's care because he was a god, right? Thinking of this, Pain looked at Hoodlum, who was trapped in the sword formation, with some schadenfreude. Just as Pain was worried that Hoodlum would deliberately weaken his strength and deliberately cause a conflict between him and Nangongja, once he encountered an opportunity to weaken such a schemer, Pain was naturally willing to facilitate such a thing to happen. For Pain, the most useful thing was actually Hoodlum's cunning mind. After all, Pain was self-aware. Although he could do such a thing, it would often be full of loopholes. He was still not as skilled as Hoodlum, who was immersed in conspiracy for a long time. But as for Hoodlum's strength, Pain felt that the weaker Hoodlum was, the better. As a guy who relied on his brain to make a living, if he had a sword in his hand that was enough to kill his master, wouldn't it be too dangerous? Everyone has been in the shinobi world for so many years. What kind of people haven't they seen and what kind of things they haven't experienced? It's just a simple trap for someone who is a threat to him. For Pain, there is no psychological pressure at all. Chapter 483. When Nangongja forced Pain to retreat, Nangongja's figure instantly appeared beside the sword formation that trapped Hoodlum. Nangongja gently swiped his finger across the tribulation sword in his hand. A tiny black dot of light that gave off a dangerous aura that could not be ignored rotated at the tip of his finger. Nangongja used his mind to check the dot of light that came from the tribulation sword. He seemed to find that it had stabilized. Nangongja nodded slightly and pointed his finger at the sword formation. The black dot of light rushed towards the sword formation as if it had received an order. It was like a drop of thick ink in a glass of white water. The originally transparent sword chi with a slight blue luster was now completely dyed black. If one looked carefully at the sword chi that had been dyed black, it was not difficult to see that there were traces of black lightning floating on it from time to time. This black speck of light was a strand of chi of heavenly thunder that Nangongja had extracted from the tribulation sword in his hand. The tribulation sword was a divine weapon that had been born under the heavenly punishment by chance. In the process of familiarizing himself with the tribulation sword, his grasp of the tribulation lightning within the tribulation sword became stronger and stronger. Right now, Nangongja was using Hoodlum, who was trapped in the sword formation, to try and integrate the heavenly punishment lightning into his sword chi. After all, he wasn't that proficient and couldn't integrate the heavenly punishment lightning directly into his sword chi. Therefore, Nangongja could only temporarily force away Pain, who was fighting with him, to attack Hoodlum from the side of the sword formation with his sword chi. When the tribulation lightning was integrated into the sword chi, Hoodlum could clearly feel that the attack he had to endure directly increased by a level. Every time Hoodlum's extremely hard and tough wooden stick that was condensed from chakra intersected with the sword chi, an extremely destructive lightning would be released from the sword chi and invade the wooden stick in his hand. If Hoodlum had not discovered it in time and used chakra to separate his hand from the wooden stick in his hand, the lightning would have invaded his body. After receiving 6 or 7 sword chis, the wooden stick in Hoodlum's hand had already turned from a strange white color to a charred black from the high temperature. Hoodlum sensed that the wooden stick in his hand couldn't withstand more sword chi attacks, so he diverted some of his attention to human Dao Pain and Azura Dao Pain, who were watching from afar. His eyes flashed with annoyance. Although his teleportation ability could not be used due to the sudden sense of crisis, he actually still had many methods to resist Nangongja's sword chi. However, these methods could expose his ability. Revealing this level of Mokuton ninjutsu was already the limit of Hoodlum's power. He brandished the wooden stick in his hand, shattering the sword chi that was difficult to dodge. The wooden stick in his hand also broke into several charcoal-like pieces after a crisp sound. Hoodlum looked at Pain and said loudly, "Pain, are you going to just watch like this? It doesn't matter if I die, but if your plan for me is gone, there will be a lot of inconveniences, right? You know, you are." Hoodlum didn't continue his words, but the threat in his words was so obvious. Pain, who was standing in front of Nagato, frowned slightly. As a proud person, Pain didn't like the feeling of being threatened. However, Pain knew that under his indulgence, Nangongja had already forced Hoodlum to a certain extent. Since Hoodlum didn't care about their relationship and started to threaten him, he couldn't just let it slide. He nodded to Azura Dao Pain behind him, indicating for Azura Dao Pain to use his ability to rescue Hoodlum from this predicament. Shura Realm and Mortal Realm, who were telepathic, naturally understood each other's thoughts. Shura Realm Pain's head suddenly split from the middle like a puppet. Shura Realm Pain's head didn't have the various organs that a normal person should have. Instead, there was a strange energy-gathering device in his head. This is the most powerful weapon of the Shura realm, which has a variety of thermal weapons. This is a chakra cannon similar to a particle cannon. A large amount of energy is condensed in this chakra-gathering device. After accumulating power for a period of time, a thick energy beam shining with white light with a red halo shot out from Shura Dao Pain's head. This energy pillar rushed towards Nangongja and the sword formation that imprisoned Hoodlum at a speed that was beyond what could be seen with the naked eye. Nangongja immediately became alert and channeled all of his internal energy into his legs as he jumped up with all his might. After narrowly dodging the powerful particle cannon, Nangongja returned to his senses and looked at the sword formation that trapped Hoodlum. At this moment, Azura Dao Pain's energy pillar and the sword chi sword array had formed a strange state of equilibrium. Both sides were constantly wearing down the energy contained in each other. The sword chis, sword arrays, and particle beams from the particle cannons disappeared at the same time. Hoodlum's figure charged out from the shockwaves caused by the collision of the two types of energy. After Hoodlum rushed out from the shockwave, he was in a sorry state. Hoodlum's black Akatsuki robe with red clouds on it had been slashed several times. Although there was still a layer of clothing underneath, Hoodlum's skin could still be seen through some of the deeper wounds. Hoodlum's skin color was similar to the pale white color of wood when he used wood release. This proved that Hoodlum had modified his body to a certain extent. Seems like Hoodlum's body has many secrets. What Nangongja could see, Pain naturally saw it too. Although he didn't say much, the fear in Pain's eyes became more and more profound. Chapter 484. In the center of Konoha, the rich land that used to be bustling with traffic was now in ruins. Jiraiya and Tendo Pain looked at each other, just like when they first met. However, several black iron rods condensed by Pain's own chakra were inserted into Jiraiya's body. These iron rods were condensed by Pain's chakra, so when these iron rods were inserted into Jiraiya's body, Jiraiya's own chakra flow was also stopped. Jiraiya held the black iron rods inserted into his body with his hand, his face was slightly painful. After all, when these iron rods were inserted into Jiraiya's body, the special chakra mixed with the power of Rinnegan had already penetrated into Jiraiya's body. This also caused Jiraiya's flesh and blood to be extremely close to the black iron rods. Every time he touched the black iron rods, he felt the same as inserting kunai into his body. Ugh! Enduring the pain, Jiraiya pulled out the iron rods one by one. Blood flowed out from the holes in the iron rods. Glancing at his wounds, Jiraiya made a few hand seals, covering his palms with a thick layer of oil. Rubbing the oil on his wounds, although it didn't make the wounds heal quickly, it has stopped bleeding. Jiraiya-sensei, are you sure we want to continue fighting? Tendo Pain raised his head and glanced at Jiraiya, who was standing opposite him, screaming in pain because he pulled out the iron rods. He didn't care about the scorched black on his face because of Jiraiya's katan. He asked with an indifferent expression, "Just now, I was just testing my skills. Without immortal mode, you are no match for me at all. You should retreat as soon as possible, otherwise, your life will definitely be left here." Pain's words were indifferent and even a bit contemptuous, but Jiraiya knew that Pain was right. In the previous battle, it seemed that the two were evenly matched. Although Jiraiya's injuries were slightly more serious than Tendo Pain's, they still had their advantages and disadvantages. But judging from the frequency of Pain's various strange ninjutsu and the amount of chakra left between the two of them, Jiraiya has fallen into a complete disadvantage. The chakra that was originally flowing in his body like a river has now become a trickle that seems to be on the verge of being cut off. Looking at Tendo Pain again, although there were little traces on his body because of a moment of carelessness or deliberately losing, there was no way to affect Pain's state at this moment. Although there was a clear gap between the two sides, Jiraiya didn't mean to give up the fight at all. Using his hands on the ground, Jiraiya stood up straight with difficulty. Jiraiya stared at Tendo Pain with his tired eyes, then he said very seriously, "Pain. No, I'll just call you Nagato. You know my character. For me, the Woodleaf is my home, and it's the place I'm willing to give my life to protect. You destroyed my home like this, do you think I'll give up so easily?" Tendo Pain's stiff face also showed a self-deprecating smile at this moment. He looked at Jiraiya and said, "So many years have passed, but I haven't forgotten that you took in 3 children who didn't have any ability to protect themselves. It was you who gave us some ability to protect ourselves in a dangerous place like the ninja world. Without you, we wouldn't be where we are now. I know that Jiraiya-sensei may have regretted saving us 3 children. After all, it can be said that I destroyed your home with my own hands. However, I am still grateful for the kindness you have shown us back then, so I will personally present you with the best gift I can give you. So that you can leave this world with glory, not with illness all over your body. Let me, the God who walks in the world, send you on your last glorious journey." Pain's words were ruthless, but they were full of a different kind of human touch. After all, for a ninja, the most unacceptable thing is to leave this world alone in a sickbed. When Jiraiya was young, he had been fighting with all kinds of enemies. Although he deliberately didn't let himself suffer any serious injuries, it was inevitable that many hidden injuries were left on his body. As he grew older, these injuries became more and more obvious. Jiraiya can still suppress the pain caused by such injuries with his profound cultivation, but Jiraiya knows that one day he won't be able to suppress such pain because of the weakness of his body. Jiraiya also had a strange thought in his mind. If he was really like what Tong Payan said, sacrificing his life to protect his home, maybe it would be a good thing. Thinking of this, Jiraiya suddenly felt that his heart became relaxed. His chest, which had become heavy and difficult to breathe because of sadness and anger, suddenly became light at this moment. Now the so-called revenge and compensation in Jiraiya's mind has become a lot lighter. At this moment, Jiraiya just wanted to be able to fight with his disciple happily. Jiraiya's mood change was also obviously noticed by Pain. Seeing that Jiraiya was relieved of all the heavy burdens in his heart and just wanted to fight happily, Pain's eyes seemed to have a bit of joy and envy. If he can, he also wants to put down all the unwillingness, anger, and sadness in his heart and enjoy the battle. But he can't. Yahiko's life, the peace of the shinobi world, these heavy burdens are things that Nagato can't and is unwilling to put down. So, let's give something that I can't get to my teacher easily. Fight! 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 A voice shouted loudly in Jiraiya and Pain's heart. The two of them rushed towards each other with burning fighting spirit in their eyes. There was no unpredictable ninjutsu, no strange genjutsu. At this moment, Jiraiya and Pain were just fighting each other with the most primitive and most effective way to release their inner fighting spirit. At this moment, it seems that collecting bijou is not so important in Pain's heart. At this moment, Pain and Jiraiya only want the two of them to fight well. Chapter 485. Watergate stood up from his cross-legged posture and looked at the shadow clones sitting around him. Watergate's face showed a gratified smile. At this moment, whether it was Minato himself who had already stood up or the 9 shadow clones who were sitting cross-legged on the ground with their eyes closed, their eyes had turned into the orange frog eyes, and red eyeshadow had also appeared on their eyelids. At this moment, Watergate's posture is the perfect sage mode that Fukasaku Sennin said before. Except for his own eyes, there is no sign of toad transformation. Maintaining his human posture, but being able to use Senjutsu chakra like an extension of his arm, this is the most perfect posture that has appeared among all the sage mode cultivators of Mount Myaboku. Thank you too. Looking at Fukasaku Sennin and Shima Sennin looking at him with gratification, Watergate bowed to the 2 toads, who have lived for God knows how long, to express his gratitude to them for helping him practice sage mode. After Fukasaku Sennin and Shima Sennin saw Watergate's gratitude to them, although they didn't say anything, the gratification in their eyes was so difficult to hide. Well, Watergate boy. Now is not the time to be polite with each other, now Woodleaf and Jiraiya need your help more. When Fukasaku Sennin mentioned Jiraiya's name, Watergate's eyes flashed with a dignified look. Only after successfully practicing sage mode, did he know that Jiraiya, who fought against Pain Rikudo alone, had to have a death wish to be able to defeat such a powerful existence like Pain Rikudo. To Sennin, please open the restriction of Mount Myaboku now and let me return to Woodleaf. As the Hokage of Woodleaf, I've been late for a long time. After hearing Watergate's words, Fukasaku Sennin and Shima Sennin also made a few hand signs that they didn't know how to use ninjutsu and opened the outer barrier of Mount Myaboku. After seeing Fukasaku Sennin and Shima Sennin open the barrier, Watergate also used his Flying Thunder God Jutsu and Summoning Jutsu to instantly transfer to a relatively remote corner of Woodleaf Village. As soon as Watergate's figure stabilized, he immediately used Summoning Jutsu to summon Fukasaku Sennin and Shima Sennin to his side. He let the 2 Senjutsu stand on his shoulders to assist him in using Senjutsu chakra to sense the invading enemies within the range of Konoha village, and the Senjutsu driven by Senjutsu chakra and the assistance of the 2 Senjutsu is naturally very effective. Combined with Watergate's understanding of Woodleaf Village, he quickly recognized the enemies in Woodleaf Village. 2 enemies who matched the aura of 6 Paths clone mentioned by Jiraiya were fighting fiercely in Nangongja's house at this moment, and beside these 2 people, in addition to Nangongja's aura, there was also the aura of a person who seemed to be very familiar with him. This person is the mysterious masked man who invaded Woodleaf more than 10 years ago and released 9 tails. When Watergate realized this, his heart was already filled with anger. But although Watergate's heart was very angry, he also knew that there were priorities. Although Watergate was not so clear about Nangongja's strength, he also perceived Nangongja's majestic energy through Sennin Jutsu, which was far more than the 3 enemies around him. Moving his attention away from Nangongja's house, Watergate quickly perceived the 3 Six Paths clone of Pain wandering in the Woodleaf, but seemed to have been entangled by the Woodleaf ninjas. But Watergate still didn't decide to help the ninjas who were still entangled with Pain's Rikudo, but continued to search. Finally, Watergate found the figure he had been looking for. In the original center of Woodleaf, Watergate felt the aura of Jiraiya and Tendo Pain at the same time. It's here. Watergate began to quickly use his Flying Thunder God Jutsu, and his figure flickered and suddenly appeared beside Jiraiya. For Watergate, who suddenly appeared on the battlefield, Jiraiya and Tendo Pain's reaction was naturally different. After discovering the Watergate, Tendo Pain immediately cast his own Shinra Tensei, but the target of the effect was not others but himself. In this way, he quickly pulled away from Watergate and Jiraiya. Tendo Pain looked at Watergate standing opposite him with a guarded face. Because Pain was very sensitive to find that Watergate had a special aura after entering Sage mode. Watergate, who has a physical fitness and ninjutsu talent beyond Jiraiya, must be far more powerful than Jiraiya after mastering Sage Mode. Watergate didn't care too much about Pain's guard against him. Because Watergate's eyes couldn't move away from Jiraiya's body at this moment. His teacher, who taught him since he was a child, was now covered with wounds. There were no less than 20 large and small wounds all over his body, which made Watergate very uncomfortable. But at the same time, Watergate was also very confused, because Jiraiya's eyes were so clear at this moment, without any anger or unwillingness at all, but with an indescribable sense of satisfaction. "Sensei, leave the rest to me." Watergate looked at Jiraiya and said very seriously. Obviously, Watergate didn't intend to let Jiraiya continue to participate in the following battle. From the brief observation of Jiraiya's instinctive small movements just now, Watergate has discovered that Jiraiya's left arm and right leg have been seriously injured, and Jiraiya's chakra is also severely overdrawn. If he is not treated in time, his life will be in danger. Watergate called the little slug summoned by Tsunade, who had been hiding on the side and didn't dare to enter the battlefield, and put the little slug on Jiraiya's body. After the little slug talked to Tsunade, a green light with life aura was produced from the little slug's body, and it continuously flowed into Jiraiya's body. Seeing that Jiraiya had been treated, whether it was Watergate, Fukasaku-san Nin and Shima-san Nin, who had been standing on Watergate's shoulder, all showed a relaxed look on their faces. Watergate also finally shifted his gaze from Jiraiya to Pain, who was standing opposite with a serious face. Chapter 486. At the moment when Watergate and Tendo Pain's eyes met, although they didn't say anything, they launched their attacks at the same time. Watergate quickly took out his Flying Thunder God special kunai from the ninja tool bag behind him. The three-pronged kunai in Watergate's hand jumped and danced wantonly like a spirit with life. This was not Watergate deliberately showing his kunai skills, but through this method, Pain couldn't judge how the kunai in his hand would attack. Pain naturally also has rich experience in fighting enemies. Although he couldn't judge how the kunai in Watergate's hand would attack, he also quietly condensed his chakra towards his hands, so that he could use Shinra Tensei brought by Rinnegan at any time to bounce off Watergate's kunai. Watergate seemed to feel that his technique was enough to confuse Pain's vision, so he didn't hesitate to throw the special kunai in his hand out. After throwing out the kunai in his hand, Watergate continued to take out kunai from his ninja tool bag, and like a shower, he continued to attack in the direction of Pain. It seems that the number of special kunai shot by Watergate has reached the limit of the amount that ordinary ninja tool bag can store, and after observing that the number of special kunai flying towards him has reached the optimal scale to cast Shinra Tensei, Pain also immediately made a move. He spread out his hands and shouted softly at the densely packed kunai in front of him. Shinra Tensei. A powerful repulsive force appeared in an instant. Although Watergate infused chakra and launched it by special means, such speed and power are still not comparable to the repulsive force in Shinra Tensei cast by Tendo Pain. After a short pause in the air, the kunai began to fly in the direction of Watergate. Seeing such a scene, Watergate didn't panic at all. After all, Watergate also learned some about Tendo Pain's ability from Jiraiya, so Watergate was naturally fully prepared. When the special kunai approached him, the senjutsu chakra that had been contained in Watergate's body instantly broke out. Under Watergate's control, senjutsu chakra turned into a thin line similar to the chakra used by ninja or puppet-type ninja. It passed through the hole on the kunai's handle, and the special kunai that were bounced back by Tendo Pain were all connected. Watergate waved his hand gently, and the special kunai that were originally shooting towards him were all in Watergate's hands. Watergate looked at Pain's direction, and waved his hand, and the special kunai rushed in Pain's direction again. Not only that, Watergate's hand also quickly printed, and a ninjutsu was quickly cast by Watergate. Ninjutsu, Many Kunai Shadowless Clone Jutsu. Using the Shadow Clone Jutsu on his kunai, the originally huge number of special kunai also quickly turned into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, and as far as the eye could see, there was an endless number of special kunai. If Nangongzhe was also here to watch the battle, it would not be difficult to find that although the multiple kunai shadowless clone jutsu used by Watergate seemed to be straightforward and without any pattern, in fact, the chakra threads that Watergate just used to control these kunai were not removed by Watergate. Instead, they were still connected to the kunai, so these special kunai were actually constantly moving their positions and changing patterns, making it difficult to see the weakness of the attack. Although it was a bit cumbersome to say, it actually didn't take long from Watergate's control of the kunai to the production of a large number of kunai and flying towards Pain. In fact, it was only 2 or 3 seconds, and because of Watergate's chakra infusion, the flying speed of these kunai was also extremely fast. It took almost less than half a second to reach Tendo Pain's side. Tendo Pain did not use his own effective Shinra Tensei to bounce off these kunai as before. Instead, he stretched out his hands, and 2 black iron rods condensed from his own chakra appeared in Pain's hands. Obviously, it was just 2 iron rods that looked quite light, but Pain waved them fiercely. Obviously, Pain had also deliberately practiced using his iron rods for a long time to engage in close combat. For a while, the clanging sound of the iron rods and kunai intertwining was endless. From time to time, it seemed that the kunai split by Watergate's kunai cloning technique were directly hit by Pain into a cloud of smoke and exploded in the air. Looking at Pain resisting his kunai attack, Minato was deep in thought. It was obvious that this kind of attack was the same as before. The previous Shinra Tensei could be easily dealt with by him, but why did Tendo Pain have to use his own taijutsu to resist these kunai that were attacking him? While Minato was thinking, Pain, who was attacked by countless kunai, threw away the 2 iron rods in his hands casually, opened his hands again, and said in a cold voice, "Don't worry, I won't be able to stop you. But I won't be able to stop you." Shinra Tensei. As Pain recast his Shinra Tensei, the kunai that were still attacking Pain in the sky were directly bounced back by the repulsive force. Just now, Minato used a large amount of chakra to cast multiple kunai clone jutsu, but it was so easy to break through, but Minato didn't have any look of regret. Instead, he seemed to have found a way to win, and his eyes revealed a hearty look. 8 seconds. After Pain used his Shinra Tensei, it took 8 seconds for him to use his Shinra Tensei again to bounce off his suffering uselessness. Although this time may not be so accurate, it was also a rare flaw of Tendo Pain that Watergate found after careful observation. "I'm not afraid of you being extremely powerful, but I'm afraid that you don't have the slightest flaw." As long as he could find a flaw, Watergate could expand such a flaw into a bottomless abyss with his own ability. An abyss that buries the lives of his enemies. This was the confidence that Watergate had as the 4th Hokage and as the Wood Leaf of Golden Flash. Chapter 487. A large number of special kunai were scattered on the ground. Such an attack method is not very wise for other ninjas. After all, the kunai created with a lot of chakra can't exert its full power in the face of Tendo Pain's profound taijutsu and Shinra Tensei. After careful calculation, it is actually not worth the loss. But Watergate is not an ordinary ninja, and the kunai launched by Watergate are not ordinary kunai. These special kunai scattered all over the battlefield are the space coordinates for Watergate to cast Flying Thunder God Jutsu, and a place with a large number of space coordinates is the best battlefield for Watergate. Pain also knows about Watergate's ability. These special kunai inserted in the large and small corners of the battlefield are the space coordinates of Watergate's Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Pain is also very clear about this. But Pain is unwilling to spend a lot of chakra again to destroy the battle environment created by Watergate for himself. Whether this is because of Pain's consideration of preserving his strength or because of his pride as a god, we don't know. When his battle environment and layout were completed, Watergate also nodded slightly. The test is over, so the real battle is about to begin, isn't it? Spiral Flash Super will dance roar third style. A long and even a little funny name was spat out from Watergate's mouth, and when the first sound of this sentence came out from Watergate's mouth, Watergate's figure has already disappeared. Pain immediately became alert at the moment when Watergate's figure disappeared. Such a combination of high-speed space ninjutsu such as Flying Thunder God Jutsu and powerful ninjutsu such as Rasengan, any enemy has to be on guard. Sure enough, Watergate's figure suddenly appeared behind Pain, and in Watergate's hands were 2 Rasengan mixed with Senjutsu chakra, shining with blue light and a little green halo. Watergate just wanted to press the Rasengan in his hand on Pain's body, but Pain immediately reacted and directly jumped away from Watergate's attack, and quickly opened one of his hands in the direction of Watergate. Shinra Tensei. A powerful repulsive force immediately acted on Watergate's body, although Watergate also has the ability to resist such repulsive force for a while. But Watergate completely took such a repulsive attack as if he was not on guard, and Watergate's figure directly flew out under the influence of the repulsive force. The white Haori on his body was blown away by the strong wind, and Watergate has entered Sage mode at this moment. He can quickly cast his Flying Thunder God Jutsu with the help of Senjutsu chakra. So Watergate's body was still flying because of the repulsive attack, but Watergate disappeared out of thin air in mid-air. Pain felt like he was fooled. Watergate's attack speed just now was not Watergate's fastest attack speed. When Pain carefully thought about the scene just now, it was not difficult to find that Watergate deliberately led him to cast his Shinra Tensei. Others don't know, but Pain's heart is very clear. Although his Shinra Tensei has great power, it can only be cast with the help of the power of Rinnegan. Every time he casts it, Rinnegan needs to go through a short period of power accumulation before he can use it again. And such a power accumulation time is not long, but it is not short, a full 5 seconds. When he casts Shinra Tensei, it is equivalent to going through a dangerous period of 5 seconds. In such a dangerous period, if he was facing a ninja who wasn't that strong, he wouldn't need to care much about it, but the one standing in front of him was Namikaze Minato, whose strength was almost beyond the ordinary Kage tier, and after using Sage mode, Minato's danger level was enough to rival those ninjas who had become legends in the world of ninja. Before Pain had time to think about it, Watergate's figure appeared again. Unlike the previous deliberately slow speed that could be detected by Pain, this time Watergate almost completely displayed his terrifying speed after being enhanced by the Senjutsu chakra. And in order to make his attack more confusing, Watergate even constantly jumped between different spatial coordinates. Even with the help of his Rinnegan, it was difficult for Pain, who was standing on the opposite side of Minato, to detect which one was the real Minato and which one was the shadow of the densely packed Minato standing around him. And even if Pain can really detect where Watergate's real body is, what can he do? As long as Watergate's mind moves, he can instantly replace the afterimages in other places. Therefore, for Pain, he can only catch Watergate's attack, or use a large-scale ninjutsu when Watergate hasn't launched an attack on himself, directly covering Watergate's real body and his afterimages completely. Senjutsu Yin-Yang Spiral Maru. Watergate's figure jumped several times, and his real body cooperated with those afterimages to confuse Pain. Watergate finally pressed the 2 Rasengan in his hand mixed with Senjutsu chakra on Pain's body. At the same time when Rasengan attacked Tendo Pain, Minato shouted the name of the ninjutsu he used. Pain, who was unprepared, or even if he was prepared, he couldn't avoid Watergate's attack. When the 2 Rasengan attacked him at the same time, he was hit by Watergate's Rasengan rotating in 2 different ways. The 2 forces, one positive and one negative, acted on Pain's body at the same time. Under the influence of the huge explosive force and impact, Pain's figure was immediately sent flying. Just now, it was Watergate who was hit by Shinra Tensei. In just a few seconds, Pain became the one who flew out. However, although Pain was powerful, he was not Watergate. In the process of flying out, there was no way to adjust his body with Flying Thunder God Jutsu, so Pain's body could only directly hit a relatively large piece of debris, splashing a lot of smoke. Although his attack was very effective, Minato didn't let his guard down. After all, his enemy was Pain, the leader of Akatsuki. Although such an attack may cause some trouble to him, it was not enough to directly defeat such an enemy. Chapter 488. Just when Watergate saw Tendo Pain flying out, his figure was covered by smoke. His figure immediately flashed and stood close to Tendo Pain. Watergate's hand began to print, preparing to cast a small wind-release ninjutsu to disperse the smoke. Before the ninjutsu was cast, 3 figures had already blocked in front of Watergate. Although the appearance of the 3 figures standing in front of the Watergate were different, but all of them had orange hair and black iron rod-like ornaments on their face. And they were wearing Akatsuki's uniform with black silk and red clouds on their body. These 3 people are Jigakudo, Gakido, and Chikashodo, who were previously entangled by other ninjas of Woodleaf Village. These 3 Rikudo doppelgangers blocked in front of Watergate. It seems that when Watergate and Tendo Pain had just fought, they had already begun to forcibly break through the entanglement of other ninjas from Woodleaf Village to help Tendo Pain. Looking at the injuries on their bodies, it was clear that they had paid a certain price to come here. It's just that dealing with a Rikudo doppelganger is a little troublesome for Watergate, who now has the strength beyond Kage level, but it's not that difficult. But now 4 Rikudo doppelganger came out of Rendo and Ashirado because of the battle with Nangongja. 2/3 of the power of Pain's Rikudo has been gathered here. After seeing the appearance of such 3 Rikudo doppelganger, Watergate's eyes also became very serious. Jigakudo Pain got into the smoke, his hand quickly printed, and a gate in the shape of the King of Hell was summoned by Jigakudo Pain. Tendo Pain, who had 2 huge pits on his body, was placed in it. Obviously, Jigakudo was using his own power to repair Tendo Pain, who had been damaged to a certain extent. In order to buy time to repair Tendo Pain, Gakido, Chikashodo, and Jigakudo's doppelganger were all near the King of Hell summoned by Jigakudo. Chikashodo was the first of the 3 Rikudo doppelganger to act, and his hand quickly printed. When he was entangled by Woodleaf ninjas, Chikashodo's chakra had been consumed a lot. So now Chikashodo can only summon 3 giant summon beasts, which are the rhinoceros, water buffalo, and centipede with relatively high attack power. The 3 Rikudo doppelganger gathered now almost has no particularly powerful attack power. The only one who can be regarded as an attacker is Chikashodo, a summoner-like character. Looking at the Rikudo doppelganger in front of him, Watergate immediately began to act. Judging from the actions of these 3 people just now and some information brought to him by Jiraiya-sensei, Chikashodo Pain mainly summons a variety of summon beasts as his means of attack, while Gakido Pain can absorb the ninjutsu or chakra inside the body of the person who attacked him. As for Jigakudo, who had been invisible during the battle with Jiraiya before, now it seems that he can cast an ability to repair Pain's Rikudo. Years of combat experience immediately made Watergate make a judgment. He must first defeat this Jigakudo Pain with the ability to repair, otherwise, he will face more trouble. Now that he had judged his target, Watergate naturally acted immediately. Watergate began to print quickly, and 2 shadow doppelganger that did not show the characteristics of Sage Mode were summoned to his side. Although there is no Senjutsu chakra in his body, these shadow doppelganger can also cast Flying Thunder God Jutsu. Although they didn't speak, Watergate and his shadow doppelganger were telepathically connected. At the same time, the 2 shadow doppelgangers used Flying Thunder God Jutsu to arrive on top of the rhinoceros and water buffalo summoned by Chikashodo. Although the rhinoceros and water buffalo frantically struggled to get rid of the ants on top of their heads, Minato's 2 shadow doppelgangers attached chakra to their feet and firmly stood on top of the rhinoceros and water buffalo, these 2 huge summon beasts. The 2 shadow doppelganger each stretched out their hands, and a Rasengan immediately appeared in their hands. But Watergate's shadow doppelganger didn't press down the Rasengan in his hand. Instead, he kept sending chakra into the Rasengan. With the continuous infusion of chakra, the Rasengan also continued to expand. Finally, when the Rasengan had become a huge blue sphere with a diameter of nearly 2 meters, Watergate's two shadow doppelganger looked at each other and pressed the Odama Rasengan in their hands towards the huge summon beast under them. And the Odama Rasengan didn't disappoint Watergate's expectations. It directly pressed the two huge summon beasts to the ground and lost their fighting ability. As for Watergate's main body, he was also standing on the head of the centipede summon beast at this moment, holding a Rasengan in his hand. Although it didn't have a diameter of nearly 2 meters like the Odama Rasengan, it exceeded the general Rasengan and was about the size of a basketball. Although the size was small, because it contained Senjutsu chakra, the dangerous aura released from it was even more than the Odama Rasengan. Watergate also pressed his hand on the head of the centipede summon beast, and the basketball-sized Rasengan infused with Senjutsu chakra directly bombarded the huge centipede. Unlike the buffalo and rhinoceros that were directly knocked out before, the Rasengan infused with Senjutsu chakra was obviously more powerful. The huge centipede, which was 7 or 8 meters high, directly burst open after being hit. All kinds of colorful organs that belonged to the centipede were scattered all over the ground. If it was only the injuries of the buffalo and rhinoceros, it was still possible to recover after a period of recuperation. However, there was no room for recovery when the centipede's brain was damaged. This rare and huge psychic beast was destroyed here, which made the animal path's pain feel very distressed. Just when everyone's attention was on the centipede and Watergate, who was standing next to the corpse of the huge centipede, a figure suddenly appeared next to Pain, who was standing behind the three of them. He had a head of golden hair, a snow-white haori with flame-patterned patterns, and a pair of toad-like eyes and eyeshadow. All of these were proof of this person's identity. Woodleaf's fourth Hokage, Watergate. Chapter 489. Watergate, who suddenly appeared next to Jigakudo Pain, naturally couldn't be unarmed just to say hello to Jigakudo Pain, or Watergate wanted to use the same basketball-sized Rasengan mixed with Senjutsu chakra that killed the giant summon beast centipede before. Jigakudo Pain is a ninja who is more inclined to support. Although his physical fitness and attack ability have reached the general level of Jonin, that's all. For Watergate, who is in Sage mode at this moment, a Jonin is really not enough. The Rasengan mixed with Senjutsu chakra was about to hit Jigakudo's body directly. Although Gakido Pain, who was standing next to Jigakudo Pain, couldn't completely block the Rasengan with his body, he still used his hand to grab the wrist of Watergate's hand that was holding the Rasengan. He began to absorb Watergate's chakra with almost all his strength, and the Rasengan in Watergate's hand began to shrink slowly, like a basketball that was inserted with a deflating valve. It shrank visibly. But although Gakido Pain tried his best to absorb the chakra in Watergate's hand, the distance between Watergate and Jigakudo was too close. When the basketball-sized Rasengan shrank to the size of a volleyball, it finally hit Jigakudo Pain's body. After absorbing a large amount of Senjutsu chakra, there was no systematic training for Senjutsu chakra and natural energy. Even with Sage mode, there was no way to suppress the natural energy with natural energy. The natural energy that couldn't be suppressed naturally rioted in Gakido's body, and a large amount of natural energy was constantly wandering around in Gakido's body. Gakido's body began to quickly turn into a toad, his skin became rough, and pieces of meat constantly appeared under the skin of Gakido's body. After a while, Gakido's body, which had absorbed a large amount of Senjutsu chakra, had a tendency to turn into a stone toad. Jigakudo Pain, who was directly hit by the Rasengan, was also directly blown away. The physical fitness of Jigakudo Pain, who was at a relatively weak level in the 6 paths of pain, was even worse than Tendo Pain, who was hit by 2 Rasengan at the same time. A huge crater appeared at the place where the Rasengan hit. Although there was no large amount of blood flowing out, such a large piece of flesh was directly scraped off by the Rasengan, and the spine of the Jigakudo was directly broken. Although Rikudo's body's body, it to be directly beaten like this is inevitable to be unable to move or even be directly destroyed. To be destroyed. To be directly to be beaten like this, too. The battle only lasted for a moment, and 2 of the 3 Pain Rikudo who had just arrived were directly scrapped. All of this development was indeed beyond the imagination of everyone except Watergate. In fact, this is also a logical thing. On the one hand, compared to Jiraiya, Watergate's Sage Mode was more perfect. Watergate's own stronger body and more skilled and perfect Sage Mode undoubtedly allowed Watergate to obtain far more power than Jiraiya had after entering Sage Mode. After seeing Watergate, Pain didn't fully recognize the difference between Watergate and Jiraiya. At first, he even wanted to use Tendo Pain to block Watergate who entered Sage Mode, which was undoubtedly a very obvious mistake. After that, because of the distribution of combat power, the Rikudo doppelganger that came to support did not have the powerful attack power to block Watergate. Under Watergate's strategy of diversion, it seemed that they couldn't react in time. And because Kikido was eager to rescue Jigakudo, he directly absorbed Senjutsu Chakra, which contained natural energy, into his body. It can be said that Watergate's action had an unexpected gain. Just like that, this wave of reinforcements turned into a perfect gift, allowing the water sect to earn a lot of money. Chikashodo was a little slow to react when he saw the other 2 Rikudo doppelganger also leave the battlefield so quickly. A trace of annoyance flashed in his eyes. If he knew this would happen, he would have forcibly summoned the 2 Rikudo doppelganger that were held back by Nangongja before entering the battlefield. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fallen into such a dangerous situation. But if he knew that it would always be a belated warning, the current Watergate would never give Chikashodo any chance to summon the 2 Rikudo doppelganger that were held back by Nangongja. For a while, Pain Rikudo was directly trapped in a deadlock because of the mistakes in the strategic deployment. It seemed that everything was going in the direction of failure. Watergate looked at Chikashodo, and once again used his Flying Thunder God technique to come to Chikashodo Pain's side. Together with his Senjutsu Rasengan, he directly beat Chikashodo Pain until he lost his combat power. Looking at Chikashodo Pain and Gakido Pain who fell beside him, and then looking at Gakido Pain who had turned into a stone frog, Watergate was a little dazed. Everything was going too smoothly. As long as he could break the King of Hell's face summoned by Jigakudo Pain and directly eliminate Tendo Pain in it, then go to Nangongja's side and kill the last 2 Rikudo doppelganger and the damn person who released 9 tails back then. This farce of invading Woodleaf would end. It's just a pity that the Woodleaf civilians and ninjas sacrificed when Pain used Super Shinra Tensei. Thinking of this, Watergate's eyes were also uncontrollably full of anger, and the chakra in his body also surged quickly. A Rasengan was produced in Watergate's hand. Watergate kept pouring his Senjutsu Chakra and Futon Chakra into the Rasengan in his hand. A large number of chakra poured into the Rasengan, and the Rasengan continued to expand. But unlike the Odama Rasengan used by Watergate's shadow clone before, the Rasengan in Watergate's hand at this moment was not simply expanding, but was constantly being molded and expanded. As Watergate slowly raised his hand above his head, a huge 4-leaf pinwheel chakra shuriken appeared in Watergate's hand. This was the ninjutsu that Watergate and Naruto developed together before, which contained chakra's transformation and qualitative change, Senjutsu Futon Rasen Shuriken. The huge Rasen Shuriken in Watergate's hand immediately flew out of Watergate's hand under the wave of his arm, shooting straight in the direction of King of Hell's Fae. First destroy King of Hell's Fae, then destroy Tendo Pain in it. This is too troublesome and a waste of time, isn't it? So Watergate decided to directly destroy both. Chapter 490. Jiraiya, who was at the outermost edge of the battlefield, watched his disciple defeat his other disciple's 6 clones one by one. His heart that had been hanging began to slowly relax, but he didn't know why he had mixed feelings in his heart. This was a battle of life and death between his 2 disciples. Any sensei who saw such a battle couldn't keep their inner calm, right? After the huge storm caused by the Rasen Shuriken attack dissipated, Watergate glanced at the place where Pluton's summon was originally located. After judging that Pluton's summon and Tendo Pain had been completely destroyed, he slowly walked to Jiraiya's side. He helped Jiraiya, who was sitting on the ground, up and said with a little concern, "Jiraiya-sensei, are your injuries okay?" With the help of Minato, Jiraiya finally stood up. He looked at his arms and legs, nodded to Minato, and said with a little bitterness, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." "Not bad, at least I saved my life." Watergate was not a professional medical ninja, but after such a long battle, he also had a certain amount of common sense in judging injuries. Jiraiya's left arm and right leg were now instinctively trembling because of the injury. This was the situation after the tendons and veins were severely damaged. After hearing Watergate's inquiry, the little slug attached to Jiraiya's body also said to Watergate with a little worry, "Jiraiya-sama's injuries are still not very optimistic. Although he has just received a lot of medical chakra to control the injuries. But the tendons and veins of his left arm and right leg were greatly damaged because of the previous battle with pain. There is no way to completely determine whether it can be completely healed by such remote treatment, so I suggest Watergate-sama immediately bring Jiraiya-sama to Tsunade-sama for treatment. After all, Slug is a psychic beast who has lived for a long time, and she has also healed many injuries with Tsunade, so her understanding in this regard is far beyond Watergate and Jiraiya." After hearing Slug's words, Watergate didn't hesitate at all. He put his hand on Jiraiya's shoulder and immediately used Flying Thunder God Jutsu to move in the direction of Kiba Hospital. Looking at the sudden appearance of Jiraiya and Watergate, Tsunade, who had been treating the injured patients in Kiba Hospital, also immediately stopped her continuous chakra. Looking at Tsunade's unsealed Een seal and her somewhat old face, it was obvious that she had divided a lot of chakra in her body. Her whole body has fallen into a state of alert. Watergate just wanted to say something, but Tsunade had already walked to Watergate's side and replaced Watergate to support Jiraiya. With the medical chakra covering her hand, Tsunade carefully examined Jiraiya's body. Of course, the left arm and right leg that seemed to be the most seriously injured were also explored by Tsunade. Tsunade's tired face frowned slightly at this moment. Obviously, Jiraiya's injury was not so ideal. Looking at Jiraiya sitting on the ground with a cheeky smile as usual, she didn't know why the anger and sadness in her heart slowly dissipated after checking Jiraiya's injury just now. Although Tsunade's face has become a little old because of the unsealing of Een seal, at this moment, Tsunade looked so beautiful with a little pain, a little relief, and a little complaint. That kind of beauty is not a coquettish beauty, but a kind of beauty accumulated over the years. This kind of beauty was naturally seen by Jiraiya, and in Jiraiya's eyes, this kind of beauty was infinitely magnified. Jiraiya stretched out one of his hands and gently hugged Tsunade in his arms. Although he didn't speak, everything looked so beautiful. Tsunade stretched out her hand and didn't use the strange force she always used. Instead, she gently knocked on Jiraiya's forehead and said to Jiraiya with a bit of reproach, "You're still the same as when you were young. You shouldn't show off when you shouldn't. Look at what you've done now." In fact, when watching Watergate and Pain fight before, Jiraiya also explored his body to a certain extent. Although when Watergate asked, Jiraiya kept saying that it was no big deal, Jiraiya knew that his left arm and right leg were completely unable to pass through the chakra at this moment. He couldn't even use his strength to move them. Although Tsunade's medical ninjutsu is very powerful, there is no way to disperse the special power of Rinnegan that has been blocking his veins and destroying his body. His left arm and right leg are actually completely useless at this moment. Even if Tsunade does her best to treat him, she can only save his left arm and right leg. If he is lucky, his left arm and right leg may be restored to the level of a normal person. But want to continue to walk in the ninja world as a ninja? Don't think about such a thing. In short, Jiraiya is useless. Although Watergate, who was standing on the side, heard a little vague, he had vaguely guessed Jiraiya's physical condition. Although it was difficult to accept, Watergate couldn't help but feel a little lucky for Jiraiya. After all, his long ninja career is finally over, and his sensei can finally live a normal life. In fact, it's not a bad thing. Watergate once again launched his Flying Thunder God Jutsu and left his sensei and Tsunade's side. Such a sad but somewhat fortunate environment, Watergate couldn't accept it. And now there are two Rikudo's doppelgangers active in the Woodleaf area, and the bastard who released the Nine Tails is also nearby. Watergate can't be at ease if he doesn't defeat these two Rikudo's doppelgangers and kill the bastard with the mask. Jiraiya also said before that Pain Rikudo is not the real leader of Akatsuki. It's just Nagato's doppelgangers who use the power of his Rinnegan. Nagato should be controlling his Rikudo's doppelgangers near the Woodleaf area at this moment. If possible, Watergate also hopes that he can kill Nagato directly. If Akatsuki can collapse, it would be great. Even if Akatsuki doesn't collapse because of this, it will also suffer a huge blow. Why not? Chapter 491. Nangongjia's Calamity Sword was constantly being used by Nangongjia as he withstood the barrage of bullets from Shura Dao Pain. Some of these sword techniques were found and practiced by Nangongjia from the ancient books of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Some of them were developed by Nangongjia based on his many years of combat experience. The swordsmanship he learned from the ancient records was indeed very exquisite. However, no matter how Nangongjia memorized the swordsmanship in his heart and applied it to his fingers, he still felt a sense of discomfort. The sword techniques that Nangongjia developed himself were slightly inferior to the ancient books of the Blood Cloak Pavilion in terms of flexibility, but they were very smooth in Nangongjia's hands. It had been a long time since Nangongjia fought with experts who were on par with him. Although he could slowly figure out some things about cultivation, these things could only be maximized in actual combat. Now standing opposite of Nangongjia, Mortal Realm Pain and Azura Realm Pain were the test stones that Nangongjia had found for himself. These two enemies had both melee and long-range attacks. Moreover, they were telepathic with each other and cooperated closely with each other. They were the best enemies to test the results of his swordsmanship. As for Hoodlum, he didn't dare to move casually now. After fighting for so long, Hoodlum finally understood that Nangongjia and Pain already had a tacit understanding between them. As long as the other party didn't leave the battlefield, they would never fight to the death. Although the situation on the battlefield seemed to be fierce, in fact, both sides had not used their full strength. Just now, when Nangongjia was fighting with Pain, all of his sword chi had been withdrawn into his heavenly tribulation sword. Most of the time, he relied on the sharpness of the Calamity Sword to fight with Pain. When Hoodlum was about to intervene, sword chi rushed out from Nangongjia's Calamity Sword one after another. Countless sword chi directly wrapped Hoodlum in the sword chi sword formation. Hoodlum didn't even dare to use his spatial ninjutsu. After that, Nangongjia integrated the heavenly punishment aura in his long sword into the sword formation. Hoodlum had suffered a lot from this, and in the end, he had to threaten Pain before he could escape. Nangongjia's wrist shook, and the Calamity Sword in his hand instantly drew a charming sword mark in the air. The heavenly Calamity Sword seemed to have come alive. It swiftly and nimbly slashed towards Pain of the human realm, who was about to slap Nangongjia's face with his hands open. In Nangongjia's guess, after seeing the sharpness of the Calamity Sword in his hand, Pain would definitely choose to temporarily dodge or use his skills to deflect the Calamity Sword in his hand. But at this moment, Pain changed his appearance. Instead, he was like a professional berserker. Even if he was hit by Nangongjia's sword, he must hit Nangongjia's body with his hand. His originally cold and indifferent eyes at this moment became more human-like after receiving more psychic force from Nagato. The eagerness from the depths of his heart seemed to be gushing out from his eyes. And seemingly understanding that his companion was attacking, Pain naturally opened all the big and small muzzles on his body and fired all the bullets at Nangongjia. In this way, Nangongzha spaced to dodge and force Nangongzha to confront Nangongzha head-on. Why were the Six Paths doppelgangers of pain so eager to help? Why were they acting like they didn't put in any effort just now? Although Nangongzha didn't know the reason, Nangongzha knew that he must not hold back too much now. Otherwise, he will definitely lose. Tisk, a sound of displeasure came from his mouth. Nangongzha's eyes began to narrow slightly. His originally handsome eyes at this moment seemed to be covered with a layer of dark red luster. Although his pupils were still black, bursts of dark red light were constantly emitted. Nangongzha's pair of sword-like eyebrows were slightly raised at this moment, just like the sword in his hand, slightly raised, full of aggressiveness. If people who were familiar with Nangongzha, such as Nangongro, Mashiro, and Little Linger, appeared here, they may not necessarily think that this person full of violent aura is the usual amiable and gentle family member. But if it was a ninja who fought against Nangongzha in the Shinobi World War, or when Nangongzha was on a mission, there would be few witnesses who saw Nangongzha's current appearance. Most of them would definitely look at Nangongzha with trembling legs and a face full of fear, and then from their throats, they would squeeze out the name, Woodleaf Yama, that belonged to Nangongzha. Although the sword in his hand was about to attack Rendo's body, and he was about to be hit by Rendo's reckless attack. But Nangongzha seemed to be completely unmoved. Although his momentum changed in an instant, the attack route of the sword in his hand did not change at all. Got it. Got it. Got it. Seeing that his hands were about to hit Nangongzha's body, as long as Rendo's ability was fully activated, no matter how terrifying his physical cultivation was, his soul would be extracted. And no matter how strong a person's soul was, once it lost the support of the physical body, there was nothing to be afraid of, right? 10 centimeters. 8 centimeters. 7 centimeters. Puchi. The sword in Nangongzha's hand had already pierced through Rendo's shoulder blade, but Rendo was completely unmoved. After all, the Six Paths of Pain was transformed from a corpse, and there was no such thing as pain. Rendo adjusted a little and still bombarded his palm towards Nangongzha, as if he wanted to die together with him. 5 centimeters. 3 centimeters. 2 centimeters. Seeing that there was only a little distance between his palm and Nangongzha's body, Rendo found that there was something between his palm and Nangongzha's body. Nangongzha, who was originally holding the Heavenly Disaster Sword with one hand, had unknowingly placed his other hand on the hilt of the Heavenly Disaster Sword. With a mocking smile at the corner of his mouth, Nangongzha poured a large amount of internal strength into the sword to stimulate the power of the sword. Chapter 492. With the infusion of a large amount of internal force, the Heaven's Disaster Sword also spontaneously triggered the natural energy contained in the air around it. With the Heaven's Punishment aura contained in its body as a primer, a large amount of internal force and natural energy were converted into Black Heaven's Punishment thunder. Bolts of black lightning constantly surged on the Tribulation Sword and poured into Pain's body for a long time. The destructive Heaven's Punishment thunder constantly destroyed Pain's body, and these Heaven's Punishment thunder also spread from the Heaven's Disaster Sword to Nangongzha's body. After being with the Heaven's Disaster Sword for many years, Nangongzha also had an extremely high resistance to the Heaven's Punishment thunder contained in it. For a period of time, he could still withstand the effects of the Heaven's Punishment thunder wandering in his body, but Pain was different. A large amount of Heaven's Punishment thunder was injected into his body, directly causing Pain's body to begin to carbonize from the inside out. In just a few seconds, the surface of Pain's body also became a layer of charred black. Nangongzha stopped his continuous infusion of internal force, and the thunder surging on the Heaven's Disaster Sword also dissipated as Nangongzha withdrew his internal force. Pulling out his Heaven's Disaster Sword from the charred body of Pain, Nangongzha mercilessly kicked Pain's body. Pain's body was like fragile glass, and it was directly shattered by Nangongzha's kick. Pieces of charred residue of different sizes were scattered all over the ground, as if proving the existence of pain in the human realm. Hoodlum, who had been wandering on the side, had already noticed that something was wrong when he saw Pain suddenly start to fight desperately. He quietly prepared for space teleportation. When Nangongzhi cleanly turned Pain into a pile of residue on the ground, Hoodlum also made a prompt decision to directly use his space ninjutsu, and his figure disappeared in an instant. After seeing that Pain was defeated and Hoodlum escaped, Shuradao Pain immediately prepared to retreat. Pain's 6 paths must not all be lost in the wood leaf. Nangongzhi looked at Shuradao Pain's departing figure, but he had no intention of pursuing. Just now, the act of using Heaven's punishment thunder to attack Pain was still somewhat beyond Nangongzhi's expectations, although it was only a few milliseconds that were negligible to ordinary people. However, Nangongzhi's body was also slightly paralyzed at the moment because of Heaven's punishment thunder. There was no way he could use his speed to chase Shuradao Pain. Just when Nangongzhi thought that Shuradao Pain would escape, a golden figure suddenly appeared not far from Shuradao Pain. The person who came was Yondame Watergate, who came to support Nangongzhi. He threw a special 3-pointed kunai in his hand towards Shuradao Pain's side. Shuradao Pain, who had already used up all his kunai, had almost no power to fight back. He raised his arm and used the remaining chakra in his body to drive his fist away from his body. He wanted to hit the kunai that Watergate shot towards him. However, Watergate's movements were faster than Shuradao Pain's movements. He quickly used his Flying Thunder God Jutsu, and Watergate's figure had already reached the side of the kunai that he just threw out. Watergate held the kunai in his hand and once again threw it towards Shuradao Pain's side. Watergate's figure flickered a few times as the kunai flew, and his figure was already close to Shuradao Pain. He quickly formed a Rasengan in his hand and directly pressed it towards Shuradao Pain's body. It seems that an ordinary Rasengan can't kill Shuradao Pain. Watergate's empty hand also formed a Rasengan almost instantly, and then pressed it towards Shuradao Pain's body. Rasengan attacked Shuradao Pain's body one after another. Shuradao Pain didn't know whether he suffered a dozen or 20 Rasengan attack in succession, but his body became full of holes. Like a broken doll, Shuradao Pain fell directly to the ground. After confirming that Shuradao Pain was dead, Watergate used the body flicker technique to appear beside Nangongzhi. Slightly cupping his hand towards Nangongzhi, Watergate said to Nangongzhi, "This time, thanks to you blocking Pain's 2 Rikudo doppelgangers and the masked man, otherwise, Woodleaf would have suffered more losses." Facing Watergate's gratitude, Nangongzhi didn't show any special emotions. After all, in terms of identity, Nangongzhi is the head of the powerful Bloodcloak Pavilion, and Watergate is the Hokage of Woodleaf. They can almost be regarded as people of the same status. Although Nangongzhi lives in Woodleaf, he has long been separated from Woodleaf, so Nangongzhi doesn't have to bow to Watergate. So Nangongzhi just waved his hand casually, and then said to Watergate, "It's nothing, it's just a small matter. If it weren't for these guys who didn't know what's good for them and even threatened me with my family, I wouldn't have killed them like this. Pain's Rikudo doppelganger is just the power on the surface, the real enemy needs to be dealt with by Sandame Hokage. The speaker has the intention, the listener has the intention." Nangongzhi's words meant to tell Watergate. The reason why he fought with 2 of Pain's Rikudo doppelgangers is just because these guys put their own guns on his muzzle. I also know about Nagato standing behind Pain's Rikudo doppelganger, but I don't intend to participate in it. Such a thing to eradicate the enemy for Woodleaf shouldn't be done by someone like me who just wants to protect his own family. You should solve it by yourself. After all, Watergate is a person who has been in a high position for many years, so he immediately understood Nangongzhi's meaning. Although Nangongzhi's words were very disrespectful, Watergate is not the kind of childish child who shows his emotions on his face. He really has no position, and there is no reason for Nangongzhi to accompany him to eliminate Nagato, although he can pay some price to let Nangongzhi act with him. But as a Kage-level powerhouse, as a Woodleaf Hokage, Watergate will never allow Nangongja to act like this. It's just a trivial Nagato, don't you have a way to deal with it? Chapter 493. Seeing that Minato seemed to have understood his intentions, Nangongja didn't stay any longer. Instead, he walked in the direction of his home. His sister Nangongja, Mashiro, and Little Linger are still in the secret room at the moment, waiting for the news of his safety. In Nangongja's heart, the ninja world, Pain, and Nagato are all not as important as his family. Nangongja's figure slowly disappeared in front of his eyes, and Watergate walked to the side of Shura Du Pain, who was just beaten into a sieve by him. Pulling out a black iron rod from the bloody body of Shura Du Pain, Watergate instantly began to absorb the natural energy floating in the air. After harmonizing with the physical energy and spiritual energy that already existed in his body, Watergate's eyes have become orange pupils and red eyeshadow after using Sage Mode. Injecting the Senjutsu chakra in his body into the iron rod, Watergate instantly confirmed the location of Nagato through the connection between the iron rod and Nagato himself. Throwing the trident in his hand again and again, Minato arrived at the place where Konan and Nagato were hiding in a tall tree created by Konan's paper release in just a few seconds. Konan and Nagato in the giant tree also quickly noticed Watergate's uninvited attack. Konan raised her foot, obviously wanting to fight with Watergate to buy time for Nagato to evacuate. But just as Konan was about to go out, Nagato raised his hand and blocked Konan. The previous battle with Pain Rikudo obviously consumed a lot of Nagato's strength, and now Nagato looked a little tired. But it was not to the point of exhaustion, so although Konan didn't understand why Nagato didn't let her fight, she still listened to Nagato's words. She gently waved her hand, and the pieces of paper that were disguised as trees fluttered in the air. A hole big enough for one person to pass through appeared on the trunk. Watergate didn't hesitate and walked directly in front of Nagato. Instead of the expected hostility, Watergate looked at Nagato's long red hair and skinny body with a little curiosity. Smiling slightly, as if to show his kindness, Watergate said to Nagato and Konan, two brothers and sisters, although you and I have never met, I have heard a lot about you from Jiraiya-sensei. Today, we can finally meet, I don't know whether to be happy or sad. Watergate said what was in his heart. Although Watergate was not very familiar with Nagato and Konan, the three of them were Jiraiya's apprentices after all. With such a relationship, there was no way to treat each other with the attitude of treating strangers. Looking at Watergate standing opposite the two of them with a face full of emotion, Konan, who didn't seem to be so good at talking, still had a frosty look, but Nagato rarely talked to Watergate, so what if you are sad, so what if you are happy? Although you and I are from the same sect, the life we have experienced is completely different. You have lived in the stable Woodleaf since you were a child. Although you went to the battlefield at a young age, you also fought with a group of people who also came from Woodleaf. And we, the orphans of war, can only hold the broken piece of wood in the whirlpool of war to prevent ourselves from being completely involved and crushed. I have always been grateful to Jiraiya-sensei for letting me, Konan, and Yahiko learn ninjutsu by his side. If it weren't for Jiraiya-sensei, we would have died long ago. However, I don't think that what I did was wrong. Because destroying a small piece of illusory paradise, and then making the whole ninja world a real place without war, a quiet and peaceful place, isn't such an exchange cost-effective? Why do you want to refuse? Originally, when Watergate saw that Nagato could talk to him, Watergate's heart inevitably showed a touch of joy. Although Nagato did destroy a large part of Woodleaf, and many people were seriously injured or even lost their lives under Nagato's attack, but with timely rescue and evacuation, such people accounted for a small number of people. As a Hokage, the most important thing to do is not to let your emotions overwhelm your reason. He needs to consider not only his own feelings, but also the interests of Woodleaf. As long as Nagato was willing to communicate with him, Watergate felt that he had a great chance to persuade Nagato to turn over a new leaf. But listening to Nagato's words, did he have the slightest awareness of his own wrongdoings? Even now, you still refuse to come to your senses. Do you still think that there is nothing wrong with your actions? The smile on Watergate's face gradually solidified, and a burst of killing intent also escaped from Watergate's body. Feeling Watergate's killing intent, Conan also surrounded herself with a lot of white papers, obviously planning to attack Watergate before Watergate did. After hearing Watergate's words, Nagato, who was questioned by Watergate, became more indifferent and silent. Wrong? I don't make mistakes. I'm the one who inherited the eyes of the Rikudo Sennin. I'm a god walking in the world. The decisions I make are never wrong. On the contrary, they are the best choice for the shinobi world. Whether it's Woodleaf or other ninja villages, they keep saying that they love peace, but which one of the 3 great ninja wars didn't start between the 5 great ninja villages? Because of your conflicts of interest, the entire ninja world is dragged into the quagmire of war. Isn't that wrong? In that case, it's better to let me trigger a more large-scale war, and then let everyone see the great power that they can't disobey. Succumbing to power, fearing power, only such power can truly bring peace to the shinobi world. With that said, Nagato's eyes were filled with a fanatical emotion. Watergate knew that even if he said more, there was no way to change Nagato's mind. The only thing he could do was to defeat Nagato and Conan, who were standing opposite him at the moment. Chapter 494. The atmosphere between the two sides instantly became tense. Watergate's body exuded a powerful aura, and the Senjutsu chakra almost overflowed from Watergate's body. The white flame-lined Haori on Watergate's body was fluttering in the wind. Watergate directly teleported to Nagato's side, and a Rasengan immediately appeared in Watergate's palm. He pressed the Rasengan in his hand towards Nagato's body, but a layer of invisible shield protected Nagato, so the Rasengan in Watergate's hand couldn't hurt Nagato at all. As the holder of the Rinnegan, known as the Sage's Eye, Nagato wasn't a weak waste after losing his 6 paths of pain. On the contrary, it was the Rinnegan that gave Nagato the most powerful power. The power of the Rinnegan was the real Sage's Eye. At this moment, the shield that Nagato used belonged to the power of the outer path. Such a shield was somewhat similar to the Hyuga's gentle fist, revolving heaven, but compared to the power of the Rinnegan, the shield displayed by the Rinnegan has a super strong defensive ability with no blind spots. Conan's hands were also quickly forming hand seals, and a ninjutsu was instantly cast by Conan. Paper release, infinite paper shuriken jutsu. A piece of white paper turned into a sharp shuriken under Conan's control, and attacked in the direction of Watergate. At first, Watergate used the Sanjiu in his hand to block some of the shurikens flying towards him, so that he could continue to attack Nagato. After all, in Watergate's view, no matter how strong the shield was, there was a limit. As long as his attack power rose to a certain level, any shield would be forcibly broken. But when Watergate saw that the shurikens that he hit with the Sanjiu fell to the ground, they immediately turned into a piece of white paper and flew back to Conan's side. Under Conan's control, they turned back into shurikens and shot towards him. Watergate knew that he couldn't passively take the attack. Wave after wave of continuous attacks would gradually numb his spirit, which had been passively defending, and numb his nerves would definitely lead to him being at a disadvantage under such continuous attacks. So Watergate immediately used his body to retreat, letting himself out of the attack range of the paper release, infinite paper shuriken. After seeing Watergate retreat, she also stopped her infinite paper shuriken jutsu. The paper that turned into paper shurikens turned back into a piece of white paper suspended beside Conan. Conan casually waved her hand, and a white paper pillar wrapped in white paper appeared beside Conan. It was so white that it almost looked like a human. Conan looked at Nagato beside her with a questioning look in her eyes. Obviously, this human-like object wrapped in white paper was very meaningful to both Conan and Nagato. After a short silence, Nagato also nodded to Conan, seeming to have made a decision. After receiving Nagato's instructions, Conan's hand waved elegantly like a conductor in a concert. Pieces of white paper continued to fall from such a humanoid white paper pillar. As the white paper continued to fall, the humanoid figure hidden in the white paper finally revealed his appearance. He had short orange hair, special eyes formed by ripples, and black metal rod-like ornaments on his face and body. This person hidden in the white paper was Pain Tendo, who Watergate thought was destroyed by the Senjutsu, Wind Release, Raisin Shuriken together with Yama's summon. From the looks of it, he was saved by his junior sister, Xiao Nan, who used the paper escape technique. To be able to save someone from the Raisin Shuriken, although Conan was a woman, it was enough to see that she wasn't simple. However, although Pain Tendo was rescued, it was obvious that his condition wasn't so good. Although the place hit by Watergate's Inyang Raisin Shuriken was slightly repaired, it seemed that it was just a superficial wound, and the flesh around the wound looked so fragile. Watergate finally understood why Conan and Nagato hesitated when he released Pain Tendo. After all, Pain Tendo was his other junior brother, and also Conan and Nagato's close friend, Yahiko's body. According to the current situation, if he used Pain Tendo to fight with him, then naturally, he couldn't avoid serious injuries because of the battle. But if he didn't use Pain Tendo, then Nagato and Conan, who didn't have outstanding attack power, wouldn't be enough to directly defeat Watergate, who was a powerful ninja in the world. Obviously, at this moment, Conan and Nagato were ready to fight Watergate to the end, even if they lost Pain Tendo. Looking at Pain Tendo, Nagato, and Conan standing together, Watergate couldn't help but be in a trance. In the past, these three people, with their own strength, pulled up the Akatsuki in the Rain Country. Although he was a little emotional, Minato didn't slack off in the slightest. After all, no matter what the three people opposite him experienced, for Watergate and Woodleaf, they were destined to be enemies. It was because of these people opposite him that Woodleaf Ninja Village was almost completely destroyed, and who knows how many Woodleaf civilians and ninjas were injured and killed in such an attack. Watergate would never allow himself to forgive such people who have become Woodleaf's enemies because of his personal feelings. Being ruthless to the enemy is the rule that Watergate has always followed, and it is not allowed to be violated. Feeling that the Senjutsu chakra in his body had become a little exhausted, Watergate directly removed 2 of the 9 shadow clones he left in Mount Myaboku. Although the accumulated fatigue of the shadow clones directly impacted Watergate's consciousness, a large amount of Senjutsu chakra was also refined by the shadow clones and poured into Watergate's body. Fight! Since this is an unavoidable battle, then he will do his best to avenge Woodleaf, for the dead civilians and ninjas. This kind of emotion constantly produced in Watergate's heart, and this kind of emotion also constantly stimulated the fighting spirit in Watergate's heart. He must do his best to kill the enemy standing opposite him in his own hands. Chapter 495. Connecting his consciousness with Tendo Pain, Nagato was also ready to fight. In the previous battle with Watergate, in fact, Tendo Pain did not exert his most powerful strength. Now is the time for Tendo Pain to show his sharpness. Bansho Tenshin. Tendo Pain opened his palm. Unlike the Shinra Tensei that Watergate had suffered before, a powerful gravitational force that was opposite to the repulsive force instantly acted on Watergate's body. Unlike the previous battle, Watergate did not cover a large area of his battlefield with his trident kunai, so the use of Flying Thunder God Jutsu was also limited. If he used Body Flicker, this kind of gravitational force directly made it impossible to use Body Flicker. Therefore, Watergate's body was uncontrollably attracted by Tendo Pain. Conan watched Watergate's body being attracted by Tendo Pain, and quickly used her paper release, God's Origami Jutsu to control the white paper to form a pair of huge wings behind her. Unlike the wings used to fly before, This time the wings formed by Conan through paper release, God's origami jutsu, were thinner and sharper. Lowering her body slightly, Conan looked at the position of Watergate, and Tendo Pain also stopped his Bansho Tenshin at the right time and directly waved his arm. The white paper wings behind him also slashed fiercely in the direction of Watergate with Conan's arm. Looking at the white paper wings slashing towards him, Watergate also saw how sharp such an attack was. He tried his best to control his body, holding the trident kunai and using the inertia brought by gravity to collide with Conan's wing slash. Although Watergate's own trident kunai was made of special materials, it was slightly weaker against Conan's wings. After slightly resisting Conan's wing chop, Watergate's sturdy three-pointed kunai in his hand was directly cut in two. But this brief resistance gave Watergate a chance to dodge. He tilted his body slightly and dodged Conan's wing attack. Taking advantage of the inertia on his body, Watergate directly used body blink to appear beside Pain. Shinra Tensei. Seeing that Watergate wanted to fight in close combat with himself, Tendo Pain also unambiguously used Shinra Tensei to send Watergate flying. Watergate already knew that Shinra Tensei had a cooldown. Nagato and Conan knew it, but Nagato still controlled Tendo Pain to cast Shinra Tensei. Obviously, he was ready to deal with Watergate's attack. Conan, who had just used wing chop, obviously also consumed a lot of chakra, so at this moment, Conan obviously had no way to cast a very powerful ninjutsu. The key to everything seemed to fall on Nagato. And Nagato, as Watergate thought, directly began to print on his chest, and chakra on his body was constantly surging. Even because of the large amount of chakra in his body, Nagato's body was a little overwhelmed, and a mouthful of blood spurted directly from Nagato's mouth. When Conan, who was wandering on the side, saw Nagato so desperate, there was an inevitable look of worry in her eyes. But this ninjutsu that consumed a lot of chakra was not cast by Nagato's hand. Instead, it was Tendo Pain who slowly put his hands together. It seemed that it was a little difficult to open his closed palms, and a black sphere about the size of a ping-pong ball appeared. An inexplicable terrifying aura escaped from such a small black sphere. With a push of his palm, a powerful gravitational force was directly generated from the small black sphere, and Tendo Pain and Nagato said the name of this technique in unison, Chibaku Tensei. The small black sphere passed by Watergate, and the powerful gravitational force directly acted on Watergate's body. Watergate's body almost flew into the sky with the sphere. Under the attraction of the black sphere, huge rocks and huge trees were directly pulled over. Looking at Watergate, who still didn't seem to struggle, Nagato said very coldly, "Give up struggling. You can't resist such a ninjutsu. This ninjutsu is the most powerful ninjutsu brought to me by sage eyes. Even the moon in the sky was created by this ninjutsu. Just relying on your mortal body, how can you resist such a power that doesn't belong to mortals?" Although Nagato didn't speak loudly, his voice was still clearly transmitted to Watergate's ears through chakra's amplification. Watergate wanted to say something to refute Nagato, but a huge stone flew towards Watergate. Watergate could only quickly condense a Rasengan in his hand to smash the stone flying towards him. However, after the rock was smashed, it turned into small pieces of stone. The small size and the strong gravitational force that did not change made the stone move even faster. An ordinary stone has become as threatening as a shuriken thrown by a ninja at this moment. And Watergate's body was also very difficult to control because of the gravitational force from the black sphere. The stone directly hit Watergate's body. Even if Watergate was in sage mode, he still suffered a certain degree of injury. And such an injury, under the strong gravitational environment, naturally accelerated the bleeding. Although sage mode can make Watergate's wound heal quickly, even a short period of time before the healing, a lot of blood gushed out. Pieces of rocks and trees kept flying towards the place where the small black sphere was located. It didn't take long for Watergate's body to be completely wrapped by these rocks and trees. A sphere that was almost a miniature version of an asteroid was suspended in the sky, looking very imposing. Casting Chibaku Tensei was also a huge burden for Nagato. After feeling that Watergate had been completely wrapped in it and was squeezed for a while, Nagato also released his control of Chibaku Tensei. Like a meteorite falling, the huge sphere formed by Chibaku Tensei fell directly from the sky. A huge shockwave far beyond the previous Shinra Tensei cast by Tendo Pain was directly generated, as if the world was shaking because of such a fall. Chapter 496. A scene like a natural disaster was created by Pain's ninjutsu. The huge crater on the ground and the smoke in the sky proved how powerful such an impact was. Even though Minato barely managed to survive the black gravitational sphere, it was still unknown whether he could keep his life after receiving such a huge impact. Although Nagato has full confidence in his Chibaku Tensei, he still wants to see with his own eyes whether a powerful enemy like Minato really lost his life under such a blow. Enduring the discomfort in his body, he quickly completed a ninjutsu. Nagato pushed his hand in front of his body, and a huge gust of wind appeared. Wind release, great breakthrough. Although it was just a simple C-class ninjutsu, in the hands of Nagato, such a low-level ninjutsu showed the power to turn something rotten into something magical. The strong wind blew towards the place where the smoke was, and the thick smoke was almost all blown away by the wind in an instant. In the middle of the smoke, a figure fell to the ground. The white Haori with flames on his body had become tattered at this moment, and Watergate's face was also gray, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Although Watergate's eyes were bloodshot, and his body was tattered, and many places were even stained with blood, at this moment, Watergate was obviously not defeated by Pain's blow. How is this possible? This is the strongest ninjutsu belonging to the sage's eye. Nagato looked at Watergate standing in the middle of the crater, and for a moment, he was in a trance. After all, the impact of such a scene on Nagato was too great. Chibaku Tensei was a ninjutsu used by the Rikudo Sennin to seal the Jubi and create the moon. Although there was still a certain gap between his strength and the legendary Rikudo Sennin, Nagato believed that he had just used 10 or 20% of the power of Chibaku Tensei. Even so, there was no way to get rid of Watergate? In Nagato's mind, such a situation was simply unachievable. Watergate, who was standing in the middle of the crater, did not feel good either. After all, the power of the Chibaku Tensei was real. After being controlled by gravity, Watergate had been subjected to the impact of the boulders and trees on the ground, as well as the strong pressure generated by the gravity combined with the debris on the surface. In order to ensure that his body did not suffer too much damage, Watergate had almost exhausted all the shadow clones he had left in Mount Myaboku. But at the same time, a large number of chakra immortal techniques from his shadow clones allowed Watergate to survive the powerful pressure and the subsequent impact, and even retain a certain amount of combat strength. On the contrary, Nagato and Pain had become injured, and they had almost lost too much combat ability. Conan, who was not so outstanding among the three, had to take on the main combat task at this moment. Although Conan's paper release was very strange and had many wonderful uses, in the end, it still had some disadvantages. For Watergate, it was not very strong in defense and attack, and although Conan could control the paper with ease, but because of the limitations of the paper itself, she could not be very fast and fierce. Such shortcomings may not be so obvious when facing other enemies, but when facing Namikaze Minato, who was known for his speed, it was enough to become a fatal weakness. Just when Nagato was still carefully staring at Watergate standing in the crater, and thinking about how to deal with it, Watergate's figure suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, Watergate was already standing near Nagato, holding a Rasengan mixed with Senjutsu chakra in his hand, and directly pressed it on the black seat-like thing with rollers under Nagato's body. This black seat itself was made by Nagato with his own Rinnegan and chakra. It was the same thing used by Rikudo's clone to transmit spiritual force and Chakra's iron rod. Naturally, it had a defensive power beyond ordinary ninja tools. But at this moment, under the attack of Rasengan in Watergate's hand, it seemed a little fragile. Under the powerful attack, pieces of black debris floated in the air, and these things were originally specially made by Nagato to control Pain's Rikudo. Now that they were directly blown into pieces by Watergate, they naturally lost their original role. Tendo Pain, who was standing on the side, was like a puppet that had lost the control of Chakra's threads at this moment, and he collapsed on the ground. Conan watched Nagato fly out directly, and finally, she couldn't maintain the coldness on her face. With a face full of anxiety and worry, Conan urged the wings behind her in the direction of Nagato and quickly rushed in the direction of Nagato. But how could Watergate let Conan come to the side of Nagato, who had almost lost his ability to move, so he directly took out 2 Sanjiu kunai from his ninja tool bag, one in the direction of Nagato, and the other in the direction of Conan. His hands quickly formed a hand seal, and a shadow clone in the same sage mode stood beside Watergate. Watergate and Shadow Clone were telepathically connected, so there was no need for too many words, and Watergate and Shadow Clone immediately took action. Shadow Clone used Flying Thunder God Jutsu to come to the path that Conan must pass to Nagato. Watergate didn't allocate so much chakra to Shadow Clone, only less than 1/3 of chakra. But after all, Shadow Clone is not a real life, so there are fewer taboos in the battle. Watergate wants his Shadow Clone to do its best to block Conan, so that Conan can't come to Nagato's rescue. Watergate's main body also used Flying Thunder God Jutsu to come to Nagato's side at this moment. Watergate bent down and took the Sanjiu kunai inserted in the ground as a space coordinate in his hand, then slowly walked to Nagato's side and said with a little emotion, "I have always asked myself to be an upright person, but I didn't expect that one day I would face my junior brother and sister with a weapon, and fight with our lives. What a sad thing." Nagato, who fell to the ground, raised his head and looked at Watergate standing in front of him. Although he has been lamenting how he didn't want to kill his fellow disciples, the hidden coldness in Watergate's eyes and the sharpness of the Sanjiu kunai in his hand all told Nagato that in fact, Watergate had already decided to leave his life in the land of Woodleaf. Sure enough, this world is a filthy world full of selfish people and sanctimonious people. Chapter 497. Although Nagato's eyes made Minato's heart very uncomfortable, such a look of contempt and pity would make anyone feel uncomfortable. But who would care so much about a dead person? Nagato's life was now in Watergate's hands. Watergate squatted down and put the Sanjikan in his hand on Nagato's neck. The sharp edge pressed on Nagato's skin, and even drops of blood oozed out of Nagato's skin. Looking at Nagato's dangerous situation at this moment, Conan on the side shouted loudly, "No! Don't do this!" Drops of tears oozed out of Conan's eyes. Her beautiful face was like a pear blossom in the rain at this moment, and such beauty made people feel particularly distressed. But Watergate's clone, who was fighting with Conan, didn't have any intention of showing mercy at all. Instead, his moves were fierce and ruthless, forcing Conan to be unable to take a step forward. Go in peace. Use your life as compensation for destroying the Woodleaf and taking the lives of countless civilians and ninjas. Watergate's eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness, and his wrist was also about to directly cut Nagato's neck and take away the only life of such a self-proclaimed god. However, a familiar and somewhat powerless voice suddenly rang out. "Watergate, don't do this, leave Nagato's life." This voice was very familiar to Watergate, and it was also familiar to Nagato and Conan. Because this voice was the voice of their common teacher, Jiraiya, who was supposed to be recuperating in Kiba Hospital. The three of them stopped what they were doing and looked towards the source of the sound. Among the ruins, Jiraiya was being supported by Tsunade and staggered in the direction of Watergate and Nagato. After seeing Watergate's clone stagnating opposite her, Conan immediately made a prompt decision and directly punched Watergate's clone. Shadow Clone Jutsu will automatically dissipate after withstanding a certain degree of attack. Although Watergate's Shadow Clone Jutsu contains Senjutsu Chakra, it can't get rid of the restriction from ninjutsu itself. A cloud of smoke surged, and Watergate's clone also disappeared directly. Conan increased her speed and rushed in the direction of Watergate and Nagato, but she directly met Watergate's cold eyes. At this moment, Watergate's bitter pain was on Nagato's neck, so Conan didn't dare to act rashly and could only stay in place. Without her usual cold expression, at this moment, Conan's eyes were full of deep begging Watergate not to deprive her only companion since childhood. Although Jiraiya couldn't move normally because of the injuries on his left arm and right leg, he still came to Watergate's side with Tsunade's help. "Tsunade-sama, Sensei's injuries are so serious, how can you let him come here?" Watergate said to Tsunade seriously. After all, the injuries on Jiraiya's body were obvious to all. He obviously hasn't been treated, but he was forced to come from Kiba Hospital to the forest outside Woodleaf. It was self-evident what kind of adverse effect such a long distance would have on Jiraiya. Hearing Watergate's reprimanding tone, Tsunade wasn't angry. Instead, she said to Watergate with some disappointment, "You know your sensei's temper. When he was in Kiba Hospital, this guy saw the earth-shattering scene in the forest outside and knew that there was a fierce battle between you and Nagato. Although Nagato is indeed the enemy of Woodleaf, he is also Jiraiya's disciple. Jiraiya can't rest assured about such a disciple, so he repeatedly begged me to come and see. I couldn't stand this guy's nagging, so I could only bring him here." Facing Watergate's incomprehension and Tsunade's resentment, Jiraiya was not affected at all. Instead, he said to Watergate, "I know that Nagato has caused a lot of damage to Woodleaf, but after all, he is the child I watched grow up. I know how kind this child is in his heart. Although this child has become paranoid over the years because of some things. But if I really watch this child lose his life, I really can't bear it. So Watergate, as your sensei, can I make a request to you? Spare this child's life. If you can't rest assured, I will help you supervise this child with Tsunade, and I will never let this child continue to carry out such a dangerous plan. Is that okay?" At the end of the sentence, Jiraiya's eyes even had some mist. The Son of War, the leader of Akatsuki, at this moment, in the eyes of Jiraiya, were some useless titles. Jiraiya now only regarded Nagato as a poor child who was born out of his kindness. Faced with Jiraiya's request, Watergate was also a little stunned for a while. On one side was Woodleaf's enemy, and on the other side was his own sensei. Watergate, who was usually very decisive, was also very hesitant. But looking at Jiraiya's eyes full of tears, Watergate's wrist that was about to cut Nagato's neck couldn't exert any strength. But after a while, Watergate's eyes flashed with a hint of decisiveness. Apparently he had made a decision. He quickly slashed Nagato's wrists and ankles with the sanjiu in his hand. All the tendons of Nagato's hands and feet were cut off. A huge pain suddenly hit him, and Nagato almost couldn't suppress the urge to scream, but before he could, Minato quickly reached his hand to Nagato's eyes. Don't. Nagato seemed to be aware of what Minato wanted to do, and he suddenly suppressed his wail, and he could only shout at Minato with a little powerlessness. But Watergate still looked unmoved, and directly took out the 2 Rinnegan in Nagato's eye sockets. He took out a glass bottle from the ninja tool bag behind him and put a pair of Rinnegan in it. Although there was no potion in it to keep the eyes from diseased, it was the only thing he could do at this moment. Seeing that Nagato's Rinnegan was taken out, Conan became crazy, and for a while, she just wanted to come forward and fight Watergate. However, Minato once again put his kunai on Nagato's neck, and Conan also became wary of shooting the rat for fear of breaking the vases. Although the Rinnegan was taken away, although the tendons of his hands and feet were cut off, Nagato was at least alive at this moment. If Nagato lost his life because of her impulsiveness, Conan wouldn't be able to forgive herself. Chapter 498. After finishing all this, Minato winked at Tsunade, who was standing beside Jiraiya. Obviously, he hoped that Tsunade could come over and properly treat Nagato, who had his tendons cut and eyes taken away by him. After all, he couldn't let Nagato die from excessive blood loss, right? Tsunade also understood Watergate's meaning and came to Nagato's side, her palm covered with the transformed medical chakra. Although Tsunade was also confident that she could help Nagato connect his tendons when they were just cut, obviously, this was not what Watergate wanted to see. Watergate turned his head and said to Jiraiya, who was standing in front of a boulder on one side. Jiraiya-sensei, I know the relationship between you and Nagato. Your previous bonds and feelings were slowly accumulated over 3 years of companionship. Such feelings are the most violent and lasting feelings. Personally, I certainly hope to fulfill Sensei's only request so far and let Nagato be safe and sound. But I don't only exist in this world as Watergate. I'm Watergate, but I'm also a ninja, and I'm also the Hokage of Woodleaf Ninja Village. Because of my identity and my duty, I can't let such a hidden danger stay, so I now cut Nagato's tendons and took away his Rinnegan. From today on, the leader of Akatsuki no longer exists. The only thing that exists is a native of Konoha who lost his hands, feet, and even his eyes because of the invasion of Konoha. Because of the serious injury, I asked my sensei and the dean of Konoha's hospital to take care of him. I think you understand what I mean, right? Watergate's meaning was actually very simple. Of course, it was okay to keep Nagato alive, but Watergate would never allow the living Nagato to still be the leader of Akatsuki who had the power to destroy Woodleaf Village. If the tendons of his hands and feet were not treated in time, it would become a permanent injury, and the Rinnegan itself was the source of Nagato's power beyond mortals. These two extremely important things for Nagato were directly taken away, which also means that Nagato's qualification as a ninja was also deprived. Hearing Watergate's words, Conan's eyes flashed with anger, and she said to Watergate, "You are really as despicable as all the people in power." Disgusting. Hearing Conan's words, Watergate finally turned his head, and it seemed that only now did he remember that there was someone who had a close relationship with Nagato on the battlefield. After Shui Men's eyes turned slightly, a trace of coldness and threat flashed in his eyes as he said to Xiao Nan, "Don't worry. Everyone has a different status, and their behavior will be different. They will be different. Another's nectar, I'm arsenic. So don't speak based on your own likes and dislikes, it won't show how brave and upright you are, it will only show how stupid and naive you are. Didn't you see that even Jiraiya-sensei didn't deny what I did? Naive and stupid? How long has it been since someone described Conan like this? Over the years, Conan's strength has indeed advanced by leaps and bounds, and she has already stepped into the ranks of Kage level. But as the leader of Akatsuki, although Nagato also let Conan intervene in a lot of dark things, he also subconsciously protected Conan to a certain extent, so this also caused Conan's thinking to be not as strong as her strength. Usually, it's okay, she can hide her emotions with her cold face. But once something unexpected or unacceptable happens, Conan's performance is very unsatisfactory. Just like now, Xiao Nan was simply a weak girl who didn't know what to do in the face of difficulties. She wasn't the so-called messenger of God that was swift and decisive and had an indifferent expression that everyone spoke of. Oh, right, although Conan's expression was a bit absent-minded, Watergate won't shut up just because Conan's state is not good. It's precisely because Conan's expression is very absent-minded at the moment that it gives Watergate more possibilities to arrange things. Ni-san, please go back to Akatsuki and tell everyone that Nagato and Six Paths Pain have all fallen in Woodleaf Village. After all, although Nagato has lost his hands, feet, and eyes, at least he is still alive. If you don't do this, although he will still be alive, some of our interrogation agencies in Woodleaf may not be able to hold themselves back and want to get valuable information from Nagato's mouth. Any interrogation agency in Ninja Village is almost a gathering place for perverts and psychologically deformed people. In such a place, everyone tortures others as a kind of entertainment. As a person who has been in contact with the dark side of the shinobi world, it's very clear how dangerous it is. Although Nagato has the protection of Jiraiya and Tsunade, and he may not be thrown into such a place as Watergate said, Conan can't afford to gamble and dare not gamble. Conan, who has lost Yahiko, will never allow Nagato, who grew up with her since childhood, to leave her. If this really happens, Conan will also collapse. Watching Watergate take away his disciples' hands, feet, and eyes, and watching Watergate threaten Conan, who is just a girl, Jiraiya doesn't know why his heart became cold. Was this still the same Namikaze Minato who looked so positive like the sun shining on everyone? Now, Minato doesn't seem to be as amiable as he was in front of others. At this moment, Minato is ruthless and threatening. It's getting more and more difficult for Jiraiya to connect him with the child who used to follow him to learn martial arts. Is this change good or bad? Jiraiya doesn't know, because as the leader of a big force, he really needs Watergate's attitude. He doesn't care about the means, he only cares about the benefits. But as a person, he can't just drive all his actions for the sake of benefits. There is no way to find the answer, Jiraiya can only choose to be silent. Everything was seen by Jiraiya, but Jiraiya can only say nothing. Watching his disciples killing each other, even if his heart is full of blood and tears, Jiraiya still can't say a word. Because any word may have consequences that Jiraiya can't bear. Chapter 499. Nagato, who could no longer move, was handed over to Tsunade. This battle also ushered in the end of Nagato's capture and Conan's retreat. Under the threat of Watergate, Conan had to leave Woodleaf and inform the Akatsuki about the loss of Nagato and pain of Rikudo to Woodleaf. Because only in this way can the ambitious people in the entire ninja world be a little bit more peaceful. Only in this way can a message be sent to the entire ninja world. Although Woodleaf suffered some damage due to the invasion of Akatsuki's leader, it was only because Watergate, as the Hokage of Woodleaf, went out to train. Watergate, who returned from his training, directly defeated Pain of Rikudo and the leader of Akatsuki with a momentum of crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The people in the ninja world who bury their thoughts carefully wipe their eyes clean carefully. Don't be blinded by desire. As long as Watergate is still there, as long as those ninjas who stand in the top position in Woodleaf are still there, then all those who try to do something to Woodleaf, please be prepared to not only fail to bite the meat but also get their teeth broken. And just after the end of this war, Watergate's popularity in Woodleaf increased almost day by day. The ninja world is a place where individual strength is valued. Such a powerful Pain of Rikudo was destroyed by Watergate's hands, then the civilians and ninjas who live in Woodleaf have a solid backing. So although Woodleaf suffered some losses because of such an invasion, the sadness caused by the loss was quickly replaced by the joy brought by Watergate's strength. Everyone sweeps the snow in front of their own door, don't worry about the frost on the roof of others. After all, the people who lost their lives in such a war are only a small number of people. For most people, they just lost a certain degree of property and house. The heartache caused by these losses was also reduced a lot by the support from the daimyo of the Land of Fire and the statement of subsidies issued by the Woodleaf Ninja Village. At least, it wasn't a total loss without a trace of comfort. Woodleaf Ninja Village and the Land of Fire have decided to build houses for the residents who lost their houses for free and give them a certain amount of compensation for the war, which made everyone feel a lot better. But after all, this was an invasion that caused a huge impact. Everything that happened wasn't that joyful. On the day of the rescue of the Land of Fire and Woodleaf Ninja Village's statement of compensation, a piece of news swept through the entire Land of Fire. As the representative of Woodleaf Ninja Village, he participated in the Second Shinobi World War and the Third Shinobi World War, the disciple of the three generations Hokage, one of the famous Sannin in the Shinobi World War, Jiraiya, one of the famous Sannin in the Shinobi world, was injured during Pain's invasion and caused some old injuries, so he asked Woodleaf Ninja Village to retire. As the fourth Hokage of Woodleaf Ninja Village, Watergate, Namikaze also agreed to Jiraiya's request after several evasions. Nangongzhe, who had been staying at home and paying attention to the news of the outside world, said with some emotion when he heard that Jiraiya chose to directly remove his ninja identity. Everyone says that Jiraiya is just an idiot ninja who has strength but no brains. But such a person may be a little confused on small things, but he is very smart on big things. Great wisdom may seem stupid, but that's it. Mashiro, who has been accompanying Nangongzhe to deal with all kinds of intelligence, was naturally beside Nangongzhe at this moment. He was responsible for recording some of Nangongzhe's orders and passing them to the Blood Cloak Pavilion. After hearing Nangongzhe's exclamation, she said with a hint of envy, "That's right. After all, Jiraiya-sama has been fighting for Woodleaf all his life. Now in his old age, he can marry the woman he has loved all his life and get a comfortable life in his old age. It is indeed a smart thing to do." After hearing Mashiro's words, Nangongzhe slowly shook his head, and then said to Mashiro, "Although what you said is not unreasonable, the reason why I feel that Jiraiya is a smart person is not what you said. Woodleaf became strong because of the pedantry of root, elder group, and internal conflicts between large and small families, but it didn't have the potential to suppress the ninja world. After such an invasion, although Konoha suffered some losses, it also made Minato, the young and powerful fourth Hokage of Konoha, known as the Hokage. To put it bluntly, in the current Woodleaf, even if the elder group and all the forces of large and small families gather together, they can't withstand a casual order from Watergate. This is the powerful prestige that Watergate has now, this is the great power that Watergate has now, this is the great power that Woodleaf can gather. Hearing this, Mashiro, who has always been smart, also understood the meaning of Nangongzhe's words, and then Nangongzhe said, "It is precisely because of the strong power of the fourth Hokage and the strong cohesion of Woodleaf that the Woodleaf will become a powerful organization without any constraints. And such a powerful force appearing in the ninja world is something that no one wants to see. Although on the surface, other ninja villages may not have the power to directly confront Woodleaf, but that doesn't mean that they won't use some insidious means. Just one or two forces may not have a huge impact on the Woodleaf, but when dozens of forces use insidious means against the Woodleaf at the same time, not to cause any losses to the Woodleaf, but just to annoy the Woodleaf, it's enough to annoy the fourth Hokage." Hearing Mashiro's words, Nangongzhe also smiled with relief, apparently agreeing with Mashiro's point of view. People often say that there can be no construction without destruction, and only after destruction can there be construction. Indeed, after going through hardships, whether it's a person or an organization, as long as they survive the most painful period, they will definitely usher in a great burst of strength. But such a point of view is only limited to the destroyer. There are other existences in this world besides the destroyer. Seeing a new threat appear in front of them, no matter what kind of force it is, it will be absolutely difficult to accept. At this moment, Watergate has become a target to attract firepower. As long as there isn't a more threatening existence in the ninja world, Woodleaf will definitely have a difficult time in the future. Chapter 500. Woodleaf Ninja Village. In the mansion of the Senju family, Jiraiya looked worriedly at Nagato, who was lying on the bed with a circle of gauze covering his eyes. After bringing Nagato to Tsunade's house, under Jiraiya's repeated insistence, Tsunade helped Nagato connect the tendons of his hands and feet. However, because Minato was very heavy-handed and missed the best opportunity, although Nagato could move his hands and feet, he could only move. At this moment, according to the condition of Nagato's hands and feet, even if he undergoes a certain degree of rehabilitation training, at most, he can only recover to a level slightly weaker than normal people. In fact, it's not just Nagato's body that's crippled. Jiraiya's body also seriously damaged his left arm and right leg because of the previous battle with Tendo pain. Although he can walk normally now, even jumping and running are not a problem. But chakra can't be used at all. As a ninjutsu-type ninja, if his hands can't conduct chakra, doesn't that mean he's disqualified from being a ninja? A sensei and a disciple, they both became useless in almost one day. This is really a strange fate. Jiraiya took a deep look at his disciple who was lying on the bed and didn't want to move or speak. He sighed deeply and walked to the door to push it open. At this time, Nagato, who had been lying on the bed and didn't want to talk or move, said to Jiraiya with his rather weak voice, "Sensei, do you regret it?" This sentence didn't have a beginning or end, but Jiraiya didn't know why he understood Nagato's meaning. The so-called regret in Nagato's words wasn't that he resisted when he invaded Woodleaf and ended up unable to become a ninja. Nagato wanted to ask him something more distant. Nagato was asking him if he regretted saving 3 orphans, including Nagato, and training them as ninjas when he was in the Rain Country. Hearing this sentence, Jiraiya stood at the door and was a little stunned. It seemed that his thoughts were also pulled to the land that had been raining decades ago. In front of him, there seemed to be 3 children who did their best to survive in the troubled world. Finally, Jiraiya's eyes recovered. "In fact, I don't regret making you ninjas. After all, this is the only way you can save your own lives. The only thing I regret is that I didn't bring you back to the Woodleaf under the pressure from all sides. Instead, I left you in the Rain Country. Although I wasn't the one who caused your sorrows, I was the one who brought you down this path. Perhaps, this is the only thing I regret, right?" Jiraiya's voice was very low, and there was even a faint grainy feeling produced by the friction of sandpaper. It could be seen that Jiraiya's mood was very unstable at the moment. After hearing Jiraiya's apology, Nagato's heart was filled with emotion. "No matter what. Thank you, teacher, for giving us 3 children the means to survive in this chaotic world. Thanks a lot." At this moment, this child is still grateful to me? Hearing Nagato's words, Jiraiya's face had a self-deprecating smile. After all, although Nagato saved his life, he also lost his limbs and eyes. Such a humiliating life is the biggest insult for people like Nagato. His momentary kindness, he didn't expect to directly push the situation to such a point. Yes, Watergate's sudden attack was actually not in Jiraiya's calculation. At the moment when he saw Watergate, Jiraiya wanted to go directly to stop Watergate. At the moment when he brought Nagato home, the thought of simply helping Nagato end such suffering appeared in Jiraiya's mind more than once. But no matter how many times such a thought appeared in Jiraiya's mind, it was abruptly pushed back by Jiraiya. After all, as long as he is alive, there is hope, right? This is why Jiraiya coaxed Tsunade to go against Watergate's will to connect Nagato's hand and foot tendons. When Jiraiya walked out of Nagato's room had fallen into a long dead silence. After all, in Watergate's view, Nagato now has no ability to move, and no Rinnegan beyond human limits, so Watergate did not deploy Umbu to monitor Nagato. This is Jiraiya and Tsunade's house. What kind of Umbu can and dare to monitor day and night? It must be known that Tsunade has never been a good-tempered person. For their own ribs, for their own lives, almost no one dares to monitor Tsunade's house. So at this moment, no one noticed that a huge Nepenthes plant was slowly rising from the floor of Nagato's room. This pitcher plant wrapped a member of Akatsuki, Zetsu, who looked strange and half black and half white. Although Nagato's hands and feet haven't recovered, and Nagato's Rinnegan has been taken away. But Nagato's perception as a ninja is still there. Although Zetsu only leaked a weak chakra, as a person familiar with Zetsu, Nagato still noticed Zetsu's existence. "Zetsu. Did Hoodlum send you here?" Nagato's tone was very cold. Although Zetsu is also his subordinate in name, Nagato knows that Zetsu has always been with Hoodlum. Now that he has lost his ability as a ninja, Zetsu suddenly appeared by his side. With Nagato's own understanding of Hoodlum and Zetsu, Zetsu definitely didn't come here to save him this time. It doesn't matter who sent me here, what matters is the purpose of my coming here. Nagato, you know too much. I don't feel at ease leaving you in the wood leaf, so I decided to come and erase you after thinking about it several times. He has been following Hoodlum for a long time. Although he has always liked to talk all kinds of nonsense, he can barely be regarded as a qualified henchman. Zetsu came here to prepare for Nagato out of his own will? Such an answer is beyond Nagato's expectation. It seems that Hoodlum is not so good at ordering Zetsu. Not bad, I actually saw such an interesting scene before my death. I don't know what kind of expression Hoodlum will have when he sees Zetsu's autonomy. Although I may not be able to see it, I believe it will be very wonderful. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.